Chapter 692. As soon as Li Yundong woke up, he found that there was no one in the room. Only the Liuhe sword and the Bahuang sword were floating around. He stood up and saw the fan of 7 treasures and the burning thumb pot lying quietly under his feet. Obviously, someone had taken them out of the 7 treasures brocade pouch. Li Yundong frowned slightly. With a thought, the 4 magic treasures instantly jumped back into the 7 treasures brocade pouch, and the 7 treasures brocade pouch also jumped onto his belt. Li Yundong looked around and thought, where are Zhou Qin and Su Chan? But soon, Li Yundong found a note on the table. It was written quickly by the careful Zhou Qin before she left. Li Yundong picked it up and looked at it. He was shocked. The Zhengyi school has brought forward the inauguration ceremony? Oh no. Li Yundong moved and disappeared from the room in an instant. Just as Li Yundong rushed to Mount Longhu, the situation on Mount Longhu was already critical and could be triggered at any moment. Seeing that the two sides were about to fight because of a disagreement, Lu Chunping was so anxious that a layer of sweat appeared on his back. He cursed in his heart, "These bastards, it's fine if they want to die, but do they want to make me lose my position?" Lu Chunping hurried to the field and said loudly, "Don't be impulsive. If you have something to say, let's talk it out." He said to Saionji Tsunekatsu with a smile on his face, "Mr. Saionji, I'm afraid this is not good, is it? Can't we sit down and talk about it?" Saionji Tsunekatsu's eyes were fixed on the surroundings. Although there was only one Jinshin master among the disciples of the Zhengyi school here, these disciples had set up a huge magic formation to cover all of them. Once there was a large-scale conflict, he was afraid that he would not be able to get any benefits. In particular, there were cultivators from other sects staring at them covetously. Although Saionji Tsunekatsu firmly believed that if they really fought, they, the experts carefully selected from the Japanese cultivation world, would be the final victors, but even so, Saionji Tsunekatsu was still a little nervous. Although there were not many Jinshin masters in the Chinese cultivation world, and there was no one who was a lightning retribution master, there was the great deterrent of the magic formation. In addition, they were on the ground of Mount Longhu. Who knew if Zhang Tianshi, who was known as the best in the world, would suddenly come out of seclusion? Just how powerful was Celestial Master Zhang? In response to this point, the cultivators of the various sects of the Japanese cultivation groups debated for a long time without an answer, but their conclusion was that Zhang Tianshi should be stronger than Li Yundong. If he was stronger than Li Yundong, then they would have to be more cautious. After all, Li Jiandong was a figure who had personally ended the era of Masako Tachibana in the Japanese cultivation world. What was the concept of an opponent who was stronger than him? Moreover, this was the territory of the Chinese cultivation world after all. As the saying goes, a powerful dragon cannot suppress a local snake. Although there were not many Jinshin masters on the scene, the Japanese were not stupid. They would not be so stupid to believe that there were only a few small cats in the huge Chinese cultivation world here to make a fool of themselves. Would these guys hide in the surroundings and ambush them at any time? All the Japanese had a big question mark in their hearts. Thinking of this, Saionji Tsunekatsu couldn't help but say to Lu Chunping, "Lu Jun, it's not that we don't want to talk nicely, but you Chinese people are too rude. We came from afar. Is this how you welcome us?" Before Lu Chunping could speak, Zhang Ling scolded them rudely, "If you really came to worship the ancestral court of our Zhengyi school, we would naturally welcome you. But as soon as you came, you wanted to interfere in the internal affairs of our Zhengyi school, and then you wanted to take people in our territory. You have ulterior motives and are presumptuous. This can't be tolerated. Do you think that our Zhengyi school is made of straw and puppets made of mud that you can bully at will? Let me tell you, our Zhengyi school has a history of 1,800 years. We have a deep foundation and a long history. Even though we have declined today, we absolutely can't allow some clowns to behave atrociously here." As soon as Zhang Ling said this, there was a burst of cheers. The disciples of the Zhengyi school, old and young, were even more united against the enemy. They stared at the Japanese on the field with sharp eyes, eager to have a try. Saionji Tsunekatsu's face changed. Just as he was about to speak, he heard a Magawa Kagumo next to him call out the name of Buddha and say in Chinese, Amitabha, Jinren Zhang's Taoist heart is firm, brave and resolute, which is admirable. But there is indeed a reason for us to come here this time. I believe that you all know that the mystical silver fox just escaped from Kyoto a few days ago. This is very bad news for both the Japanese cultivation world and the Chinese cultivation world. Throughout the 2,000 years of history of China and Japan, every time the nine-tailed celestial fox is born, there must be a disaster. I believe that everyone here will not sit back and do nothing, will they? When everyone heard this, their faces changed and they whispered to each other, the nine-tailed celestial fox is born? No way. Why is the nine-tailed celestial fox in Japan? I've heard of this before, but I thought it was a legend. I didn't expect it to be true. How powerful is this nine-tailed celestial fox? How can she turn the world upside down by herself? As soon as Zhang Ling heard the words, nine-tailed celestial fox, her expression also changed. She couldn't help glancing at Ao Wushuang. She said to Imagawa Kagumo with a cold face, then what are you going to do? Imagawa Kagumo lowered his eyes and put his palms together. Please be merciful and give us the fox demon. We will ask for the whereabouts of the mystical silver fox and let her leave safely. Hearing this, Zhang Ling looked at Ao Wushuang coldly. Do you know the whereabouts of the mystical silver fox? Ao Wushuang couldn't help laughing out loud. Her voice was full of sarcasm and ridicule. If I knew the whereabouts of the mystical silver fox, would I have come here to throw myself into the trap? Stupid, really stupid beyond belief. Zhang Ling snorted angrily, but she didn't fight with her anymore. Instead, she turned around and said in a deep voice, Master, I believe you heard it too. Before Imagawa Kagumo could speak, many Japanese cultivators behind him began to clamor, even if she doesn't know, she must have something to do with the mystical silver fox. Catch her and force the mystical silver fox to show up. Yes, yes, catch her. We cultivators should take subduing demons as our duty. How can we allow the fox demon to run amok in the world? It's because you Chinese people are too indulgent that the mystical silver fox has harmed our country. You have to pay the price for it. Zhang Ling shouted angrily, Bastard, how dare you try to make a move here? After that, the disciples of the Zhengyi school shouted in unison. The swords behind them flew out, and they soared into the sky. For a moment, the side peak of Mount Longhu was filled with killing intent. The Japanese cultivators did not want to be outdone. They all took out their powerful magical weapons and confronted the disciples of the Zhengyi school. When the cultivators of the other sects saw this scene, they all shouted, Fellow Taoists of the Zhengyi school, don't be afraid. With us here, we will definitely not let these clowns be arrogant on the land of China. For a moment, thousands of powerful magical weapons were floating in the air. It was really as if there was a sharp sword hanging over everyone's head. If they were not careful, they would be killed. Lu Chunping and the officials and translators who had come with him were all stunned. The two female translators simply didn't say a word. Their eyes rolled back and they fainted to the ground. Although Lu Chunping knew that these cultivators had powerful means, he had only seen such similar scenes in movies. How could he have expected to experience it in real life? He also knew that most of these cultivators usually kept a low profile, but once they made a scene, it would definitely be frightening. He was afraid that this competition between thousands of people would cause a ruckus. The side peak of Mount Longhu would disappear from then on. Even if he was lucky enough to survive, how could he face the upper peak? With so many people fighting, he could hide the matter through the official power. But if the whole mountain disappeared, how could he hide it? Would the mountain fly away by itself? Although it was boring to be an official, no matter how small his position was, he was still an official. Don't treat bean bun like dry food. Lu Chunping was sweating profusely. He let out a hysterical shout, All of you, stop. His shout was very abrupt in this murderous atmosphere. Everyone turned to look at him in unison. At this time, Lu Chunping had also shed all pretense of cordiality. He glared fiercely at the Chinese cultivators from various sects on the field and roared angrily, "It seems that you have forgotten which ground you are stepping on. Is this still the world of our party? Have you ignored the orders of the upper peak? If something happens today, how are you going to explain it? How are you going to hide it? Tell me, tell me." Mao Yucheng glanced at him coldly in the crowd and sneered in a low voice, "If there is a war, this person will definitely be a man." Before she could finish her sentence, Su Yangzi immediately covered her mouth. Just as she was about to struggle, she heard Su Yangzi say in a cold voice, "Are there not many people like this in China?" Although Zhang Ling's attitude was tough, she didn't want to make a big deal out of this. She took a deep breath and asked in a deep voice, "Benefactor Lu, do you have any good suggestions?" Lu Chunping raised his voice and said, "Suggestions? My opinion is that everyone should quickly disperse and do what you have to do. Don't make trouble here." The cultivators of various sects sneered in their hearts, and many of the Japanese cultivators also shook their heads. Saionji Tsunekatsu said, "Lu Jun, we have come from afar. I'm afraid it's not good to go back like this, is it?" Lu Chunping's attitude towards the Chinese cultivators was not good, but he was full of smiles towards the Japanese. He turned around and asked with a smile, "Mr. Saionji, what's your idea?" Saionji Tsunekatsu glanced at Imagawa Kagumo and the others behind him. Seeing that they were all nodding, he said to Lu Chunping, "As the saying goes, it's better to come at the right time than to come early. Since we have caught up with such a grand ceremony, we don't want to make a trip in vain. Why don't we each choose one person and have a fair fight on the field? Whoever stands in the end will be the winner. If we lose, we will return home immediately. If we lose, the Chinese cultivation world must give us an explanation. What do you think?" At this time, Zhang Kongyun said to Zhang Ling in a low voice, "Shiji, I don't think we need to give them an explanation. We don't have to accept this." However, Zhang Ling sneered and said, "They have already killed their way to the gate of Arjuni school. Why don't you accept it? If someone takes Ao Wushuang away at our gate, even if it's a fox demon, what will the other sects think of us in the future? Arjuni school can't even deal with a fox demon, and we still need the Japanese to come here from thousands of miles away to subdue the demons for us? Humph, you can afford to lose this face, but I can't. If you don't want to do it, I will." After that, she raised her voice and said, "Well, that's it. Come on, let's have a fair fight." Zhang Kongyun wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Seeing Zhang Ling's determined face, he hesitated for a moment and couldn't help but say, "But, Shiji, didn't you hear that we can only lose and not win? How can we fight?" Zhang Ling sneered and said, "He has Zhang Liang's plan, and I have a ladder over the wall. There are policies, and there are countermeasures. Can't you just fight to a draw?" Zhang Kongyun's eyes lit up. Yes, Shiji is really cunning. Well, Shiji is smart and scheming. No, it's far-sighted. Zhang Ling hated it when others called her old. When she heard Zhang Kongyun say the word old, her eyes suddenly widened, as if she wanted to eat Zhang Kongyun alive. Lu Chunping, who was standing to one side, was in a dilemma when he heard their words. He muttered, "These be asterisk stards, after all, they still want to fight? Damn it, let's fight. I don't care." Lu Chunping coughed dryly and said to Zhang Ling meaningfully, "Well, you can solve your own problems, but I have to say this first. If any of you make any trouble or cause any trouble, you can deal with it yourself." Humph. After that, he put his hands behind his back and walked to the far side of the field, as if it had nothing to do with him. At this time, the situation had been settled. After the cultivators of the Japanese sects whispered to each other for a while, a middle-aged monk wearing a bamboo hat and holding a monk's staff slowly walked out and said in extremely awkward Chinese, "I'm Abbot Ono of the Fahua sect. May I ask which Chinese friend would like to come up and teach me?" The cultivators of the various sects looked at each other, and no one spoke for a while. Ao Wushuang sneered and was about to step forward, but Zi Yuan stopped her and said in a low voice, "Senior Wushuang, you can't go. No matter whether you win or lose in the battle, you will have to consume a lot of jinqi. If someone takes the opportunity to attack you at that time, it will be very bad. I'll go. Even if I lose, it's not a big deal. No one will do anything to me." After that, she didn't wait for Ao Wushuang's consent. She took a step forward and said loudly, "Zi Yuan of the Linggong sect is willing to fight with Zen Master Ono." Chapter 693. The inauguration ceremony of the Linggong sect had turned into a PK competition in the Japanese cultivation world. Zi Yuan's clear voice immediately attracted everyone's attention. She had been famous for a long time, and even many people in the Japanese cultivation world had heard of her name. At this time, when Zi Yuan stepped forward, the whole audience immediately fell silent. Everyone looked at her with bright eyes, nervously and expectantly guessing how she would fight with this monk. Mao Yuchang stared at Zi Yuan with sharp eyes and watched her every move. In the depths of her heart, she had long regarded her as a formidable opponent. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao also looked at the field with concern. Deng Yu tugged at Zhang Liufang's sleeve and whispered, "Shiji Lufang, can Jinren Zi Yuan win?" Zhang Lufang thought for a moment and nodded. Jinren Zi Yuan fought fiercely against Shinsu and Tachibana Wakako at the Taoist assembly last time. Although she didn't win the last round, she also showed great skills. Now with the help of the Diyuan Jin Dan, she has reached the realm of a Jinshin master. Her skills must have gone up another level. There should be no problem. She looked at the field with admiration and expectation and muttered in a low voice, "I really don't know how wonderful it will be when Zi Yuan, a Jinshin master, fights with Priest Ono." As she said this, she turned to her master, Zhang Kongyun, and said, "Master, who do you think will win?" Zhang Kongyun stroked his beard and looked at the field with flickering eyes. He said in a deep voice, "I don't know. Although Priest Ono's appearance is not amazing, he has a dignified manner when he stands there. Any random person in the Japanese cultivation world is such a master. It's really terrible." Zhang Lufang giggled. "Maybe he's one of the top masters here? It's impossible for all of them to be very powerful." Zhang Kongyun shook his head. "Although their foundation is not as good as ours, their national religion is great and their power is huge. Look at the people they sent this time. They are really elites and strong people. There are more than 200 people, and each of them is a master who can take charge of an area. This is really a terrible thing." Zhang Lufang said angrily, "Master, why are you encouraging others and destroying our own prestige?" Zhang Kongyun sighed and didn't say anything else. He looked at the arena with his disciple. At this time, Zi Yuan came to the scene and looked at the monk in front of her. She bowed slightly and said, "How do you want to fight?" Master Ono was not tall. He took off the bamboo hat on his head, made a Buddhist salute, and said in a deep voice, "The guest follows the host's wishes. Please give me some pointers, Jinren Zi Yuan." Zi Yuan quickly glanced at Lu Chunping, who was not far away. She smiled slightly and said to Superintendent Ono, "Since you are a guest, let's have a fight." Zi Yuan smiled slightly. She was so beautiful that many male cultivators on the sidelines seemed to have stopped breathing when they saw her. However, Keeper Ono didn't seem to notice it. He still looked down and said, "How do we fight?" Zi Yuan raised her hand, and the ninth heaven Zi Yuan silk flew out of her sleeve like a purple lightning bolt. Then, it drilled into the hard bluestone ground and quickly drilled out a stone. This stone was round at the top and pointed at the bottom, in the shape of a top. Zi Yuan pointed to the stone and smiled slightly. "Master, I wonder if you have played some of the games you played when you were young?" Keeper Ono lowered his eyebrows and said obediently, "Ba, I have been a monk since I was young and have never played games." Zi Yuan smiled and said, "I have also been cultivating with my master since I was young. I have only heard of this game. Don't worry, I won't take advantage of you." As she spoke, she walked around the field unhurriedly. With every step she took, the ground sank into a footprint. Everyone could see her footprints one after another. When she walked around in a circle, it happened to be a circle with a diameter of more than 2 meters. Each of Zi Yuan's footprints was of the same depth. Obviously, she had a delicate grasp of strength and jinqi to the extreme. The cultivators present were also knowledgeable. When they saw this, they immediately cheered loudly with admiration. Zi Yuan's expression did not change in the face of the crowd's cheers. With a wave of her hand, the ninth heaven Zi Yuan silk was instantly pulled into the shape of a rope and turned into a purple whip. Zi Yuan shook her wrist, and with 2 snaps, the whip made 2 straight gullies, cutting the circle into 3 parts. On both sides were where Zi Yuan and Keeper Ono were standing, and in the middle was an empty space. It was almost there. Zi Yuan threw the top-shaped stone into the empty space and said with a smile, "Master, each of us has a whip. We are not allowed to damage the stone, hit others, or move our feet. We are only allowed to whip the top. Whoever can whip the top to the other's heel first will be the winner. What do you think?" Not only did Zi Yuan's words surprise Elder Ono, but the others were also stunned. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao looked at each other. Deng Yu stuttered and said, "No way. Zi Yuan is a Jinshin master. How could she be playing with a top?" Zhang Lufang was also stunned. "Master, what is Jinren Zi Yuan up to?" Zhang Kongyun pulled his beard hard and said with a blank face, "I don't know, but Zi Yuan has always been smart. She must have her own ideas for doing this." After hearing Zi Yuan's words, the cultivators of all the sects in Japan also sneered and began to talk about it. Some of them simply shouted at Keeper Ono, "Master Ono, don't talk to her. We're not here to play this kind of child's game." Zi Yuan didn't seem to hear it. She smiled and said, "As the saying goes, a flower is a world, and a leaf is a bodhi. Master Ono, there is a big way in this child's game. Do you want to give it a try?" Keeper Ono stared at Zi Yuan in surprise, as if he wanted to understand what she was planning. However, he saw that Zi Yuan's eyes were calm and her smile was elegant. It didn't seem like she had any ulterior motives at all. He thought for a moment, pulled out a slender bamboo from the bamboo hat, and nodded. "Okay." When the cultivators of all the sects in Japan saw that he had actually agreed, they all clamored, "Ridiculous. How ridiculous. Master Ono, aren't you afraid of losing face?" Even Lu Chunping and the others, who were standing in the distance and watching the scene, looked at the scene with their mouths open and tongue-tied, especially Lu Chunping. He also knew that these cultivators had unpredictable means. He was just thinking about feasting his eyes today, but who would have thought that Zi Yuan would come up with such a wicked idea? What's so interesting about whipping a top? This girl is as beautiful as a fairy. Why is she so stupid? Lu Chunping touched his chin, and his eyeballs were about to fall out of their sockets. However, what made everyone present even more surprised was that Zi Yuan and Governor Ono, the 2 Jinshin masters, had begun to pull out their gyros. Zi Yuan raised the purple whip in her hand, and with a snap, the stone top began to spin and quickly swept toward Keeper Ono. Keeper Ono looked a little listless. He casually waved the bamboo in his hand, and as soon as it collided with the stone top, it was immediately shattered into powder by the top. Keeper Ono was shocked. He held the remaining piece of bamboo in his hand and froze in place. The cultivators of all sects on the field suddenly saw the clues. Zhang Kongyun clapped his hands and exclaimed, "Wonderful. Zi Yuan must have poured her own jinqi into the top with that whip just now, but Keeper Ono didn't know that an ordinary whip would immediately shatter the whip. This seems to be a game, but in fact, it's an extremely clever fight." At this time, Mao Yuchang's eyes couldn't help but light up. She praised, "What a good move. Even if she loses, she won't hurt herself. Even if she wins, there won't be any disputes or conflicts. It's really a win-win strategy. What a good game. Amazing, really amazing." Su Yangzi also had a look of admiration on his face. Now you know that there is always a higher mountain and a higher sky, right? Mao Yuchang snorted and said, "We'll only know after we compete. This is just a petty trick." Su Yangzi smiled and stopped talking. He turned his eyes back to the field. When the cultivators of the Japanese cultivation world saw that Keeper Ono had suffered a loss and was stunned on the spot, they suddenly became anxious and shouted, "No Kun, hurry up. You are the first one. You can't lose. Zen Master Ono, hurry up." After all, Keeper Ono was also one of the best in the Japanese cultivation world. He reacted very quickly. He immediately squatted down and used the remaining short bamboo stick in his hand to whip the top. This time, he poured his chi into the bamboo stick, and with a snap, he whipped the top off the ground. The top was extremely fast. It spun in the air and flew towards Zi Yuan like a cannonball. Everyone saw that he was fierce, without the slightest mercy of a monk. If Zi Yuan was hit by this top, her internal organs would probably be broken. They immediately exclaimed, "Dodge." However, the rule that Zi Yuan had set before was that her feet could not move. Seeing that the top was about to hit her chest like a cannonball, she was not in a hurry. With a flick of her wrist, the long purple whip in her hand wrapped around the top. Then, with a twist of her ankle, her body leaned to one side, and the power of the flying top was completely removed. Then, she twisted her ankle back, turned around, and threw the top to the ground. This time, the top was like a meteorite falling from the ninth heaven, smashing into the hard bluestone slabs and causing them to cave in. The sharp bottom of the top was like a drill bit, drilling a gully and making a squeaking sound as it sped towards Ono Musashi. Zi Yuan's counterattack caused the crowd to let out an earth-shattering cheer. Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said, "Zen Master Ono, you can't whip the top off the ground." Keeper Ono now saw how powerful Zi Yuan was. Just now, Zi Yuan had casually caught it, but in fact, it was a combination of strength and softness. Without a very deep foundation of jinshi and a very delicate grasp of strength, it was absolutely impossible to do it. Moreover, Zi Yuan had taken advantage of Inspector Ono's fierce strength and returned it to him. If he whipped it again, the top would definitely shatter immediately, and he would lose for sure. Keeper Ono's expression was serious, and he no longer dared to look down on Zi Yuan. He quickly pulled out a long bamboo stick from his bamboo hat and began to fight with a serious face. Chapter 694. The shorter something was, the less flexible it was. Just now, the bamboo stick in Officer Ono's hand was too short, so he had whipped the spinning top into the air. At this time, the spinning top was too strong. If he used hardness to resist hardness, the spinning top would definitely shatter, and he would lose. Therefore, Officer Ono took out another long bamboo stick and gently whipped the spinning top, changing its direction in an instant. The cultivators of all sects present knew that this was an extremely ingenious battle. It was a test of the two people's exquisite use and control of their strength. No matter which side was careless, they would lose. Therefore, Zi Yuan and Ono held the upper hand. One stood and casually waved the whip, while the other squatted on the ground and waved the bamboo stick with a serious expression. The two of them moved back and forth. Their movements were simple, but everyone watched with relish and did not dare to breathe. Some of the older cultivators immediately took this opportunity to comment on the strength, skills, and coping strategies of the two people. Although these younger cultivators were also the best in the cultivation world, they had never seen such a unique battle. For a moment, they watched with relish and listened even more attentively. However, Lu Chunping and the others on the sidelines had nothing better to do. How could they see the mystery and knack of it? In their eyes, this was a beautiful girl and a bored old monk whipping a spinning top in the field. Moreover, the two of them smoked for more than half an hour. The interpreter and the local officials on the sidelines were drowsy. Even Lu Chunping couldn't help but say unhappily after watching for a while, "What are these guys doing? These Japanese people have come all the way to Mount Longhu to play spinning tops with people? Are they crazy? As he was thinking this, he saw that everyone was watching the two of them attentively. He felt extremely bored and kept yawning. Zhang Ling keenly saw his impatient expression. She suddenly had an idea and said a few words to her disciple, Zhou Ping, who was beside her. Zhou Ping's eyes lit up. She walked over to Lu Chunping with a smile and said, Benefactor Lu, you must be very tired after coming all the way here. Do you want me to find a place for you to rest? Lu Chunping's face lit up with joy, but he didn't immediately agree. Instead, he glanced at the field. Zhou Ping observed his expression and said with a smile, Benefactor Lu, don't worry. How can we not know when to stop? Lu Chunping's heart skipped a beat, and she thought to herself, I didn't expect these guys to be so ungrateful. I thought there would be a good show in their fight, but I didn't expect it to be so boring. There was no point in watching this kind of battle. Thinking of this, he chuckled and nodded to Zhou Ping. Then please lead the way. Zhou Ping was overjoyed and hurriedly led this group of officials down the mountain. At this time, Zi Yuan, who was in the field, had been watching and listening in all directions. When she saw Lu Chunping and the others leave, a smile suddenly appeared at the corner of her mouth. She saw that the top had just passed the line in front of Captain Ono, and when Captain Ono was about to whip it, she immediately whipped it again. Soon, two cracking sounds were heard. It was Captain Ono whipping the top. Just as the top was about to spin in front of Zi Yuan's whip followed it like a shadow and hit the top of the top. Like a nail, the top was nailed to the ground, deep in the area in front of Captain Ono. According to the rules that Zi Yuan had mentioned, the top would only be considered to have lost if it turned in front of his feet. Therefore, although the top had crossed the line just now, Captain Ono had not lost. However, Zi Yuan's whip had slapped the top into the ground and never moved again. Captain Ono and everyone present were suddenly dumbfounded. They all knew that if anyone whipped at this time, the top would not be able to jump out if the strength was too small. If the strength was too great, the top would immediately shatter. At this time, Saionji Tsunekatsu and the others finally understood and looked at Zi Yuan in surprise. Zi Yuan had proposed to play the top. It seemed like an ordinary child's game, but in fact, it not only contained the mystery and skills of fighting, but also had a way to win. Not to mention winning a good start. In the end, Lu Chunping and the others left impatiently. It was really a good method to kill 3 birds with 1 stone. This person who looked like a fairy actually had an exquisite heart. Captain Ono was an honest person. How could he have imagined that Zi Yuan, who looked as beautiful as a fairy, would have so many tricks up her sleeves? He stared at Zi Yuan with his mouth agape. He was so stunned that he couldn't say a word. After a while, he sighed dejectedly and said, I lost. Seeing his expression, Wan Hongling didn't know why, but she suddenly thought of Li Yundong, who liked to make fun of people. She thought to herself, if Li Yundong were here, I might have to give this old monk a voiceover to describe his psychological activities. Damn, Miss Hua, you're so cunning. Su Yangzi, who had always been mature and prudent, couldn't help exclaiming at this time, wonderful. This Zi Yuan is really quick-witted. Amazing, really amazing. She easily solved our most embarrassing problem. Lu Chunping and the others are not here, so who will take the sentence only defeat is allowed, not victory, seriously? Wonderful, it's really wonderful. At this time, even the stupidest people on the field had reacted. For a moment, the cultivators of all sects in China applauded like thunder, and their cheers shook the sky. Even Zhang Ling and the others, who had repeatedly pressured Zi Yuan, nodded secretly. Zhang Ling thought to herself, Zi Yuan's talent is really enviable. It's a pity that she is not clean and pure and is associated with demons. I only hope that she will repent and be saved. If she can convert to Arjuni school as soon as possible, she may become another great cultivator in the future. Thinking of this, Zhang Ling's expression relaxed a lot. Although they had just been shouting and fighting, as if there was an irreconcilable hatred between the two of them, in front of the Japanese cultivators, she still said very politely in a loud voice, Jinren Zi Yuan wins first. The Chinese cultivators thought of the rudeness and presumptuous behavior of Saionji Tsunekatsu and the others before and immediately laughed mockingly. They also felt honored that Zi Yuan had won. Some of the Japanese cultivators with dirty mouths simply cursed at the Japanese cultivators. Some of the Japanese cultivators who could understand Chinese were not willing to be outdone, so they cursed back. For a time, dirty words flew on the field, and their saliva mixed together. Keeper Ono was considered a famous cultivator in the Japanese cultivation world. He was over 50 years old, but he had been cultivating for more than 40 years. He was also a famous Jinshin master. Sending him to be the vanguard was to test the waters, but it was also to ensure victory. But they had never expected that Keeper Ono, who was extremely strong in fighting and was known as the permanent Vajra in the Japanese cultivation world, would lose. Saionji Tsunekatsu and the others all looked embarrassed and angry. Imagawa Kagumo and Kaisai Hikariuni looked at each other and nodded. Imagawa Kagumo looked back at Kamo Mirror, who was not far behind him. Kamo Mirror understood and turned to look at a young Inyang master beside him. The Inyang master nodded and walked to the field, but he said something in Japanese. Saionji Tsunekatsu translated, "This is Kamo Yutsuan of the Kamo family. He wants to compete with Jinren Zi Yuan." Zi Yuan smiled slightly. "What do you want to compete with?" After listening to the translation, Kamo Yutsuan said a few more words in Japanese. Saionji Tsunekatsu raised his voice and said, "Kamo Kagumo said that he is willing to compete with Jinren Zi Yuan in summoning ghosts." Zi Yuan thought quickly and thought, the strongest skill of the Inyang sect is to summon ghosts. "I'm not good at this, but how can I get out of this?" She hesitated for a moment, then saw a young and handsome Taoist come up to the field. He cupped his hands and said to Zi Yuan, "Jinren Zi Yuan, let me take this round. How about it?" Zi Yuan saw that although the Taoist was not very tall, only about 1.7 meters, he had a square face, thick eyebrows, bright eyes, and a handsome appearance. In particular, his eyes were looking at her with a strong sense of love. She couldn't help but be stunned and asked, "Excuse me, you are?" The young man smiled and said, "I'm Yu Manlu of the Penglai sect." "Hello, Jinren Zi Yuan." Zi Yuan hesitated for a moment and said, "So it's Jinren Yu. The Inyang sect is especially good at summoning ghosts." Yu Manlu laughed and said, "Please rest assured, Jinren Zi Yuan. I have learned the 5 ghosts technique since I was a child. When I grew up, would be able to summon the 36 heavenly spirits and the 72 earthly spirits. Jinren Zi Yuan, just watch the show from the side. I will not bring shame to our Chinese cultivators." Zi Yuan thought for a moment and realized that she was indeed not good at this, so she said, "Well, please be careful, Jinren Yu." As Yu Manlu listened to her gentle reminder, he was so happy that his bones felt lighter. He laughed out loud and casually walked onto the stage. He took out a talisman from his robe and chanted a few words in a low voice. In an instant, the talisman began to burn by itself. In front of him, a 3-meter-tall golden-armored figure slowly appeared. It was holding a steel whip in its hand. At first glance, everyone could see that this golden-armored warrior was majestic and awe-inspiring, making them feel a sense of awe and veneration. Zi Yuan was slightly shocked and whispered, "Is this the Tianyong star Yao Gongshao of the 36 heavenly spirits? This person looks young, but he has some strength." As soon as Yu Manlu summoned Yao Gongshao, many people in the field immediately cheered. Zhang Kongyun nodded secretly and said to Zhang Lufang, "Look, he is the same age as you, but his magic cultivation is much higher than yours. Yu Manlu can be considered one of the best in the Yangshan phase. He is only 1 step away from the Jinshin phase. When he steps into the Jinshin phase, I'm afraid that there will be another great master in the world." Zhang Lufang made a face at him and said, "Bah, isn't it because you didn't teach him well? It's the father's fault if the son doesn't teach, and it's the master's fault if the disciple doesn't teach." Zhang Kongyun was so angry that he glared at her. starred. But before he could finish his words, he heard a cry of alarm coming from the field, "Be careful." They turned their heads and saw that the golden-armored strongman summoned in front of Yu Manlu had suddenly turned his head and whipped at Yu Manlu's body. This time, not only was Zhang Kongyun stunned, but even Yu Manlu was dumbfounded. He couldn't understand why the god he had summoned would turn around and hit him. While he was in a daze, the steel whip instantly lashed at his body, sending him flying like a sandbag. The crowd was in an uproar. They didn't know what had happened, but Yu Manlu had already been sent flying. Zi Yuan turned pale with fright. She hurriedly flashed and caught Yu Manlu's body. However, as soon as she caught Yu Manlu, the Vajra flew in front of her, raised its foot, and stomped on her with an earth-shattering momentum. Well, it's finally completed. In addition, tomorrow is my birthday. Please bless me, hee hee. Chapter 695. Seeing the huge foot of King Kong stepping on her, she pulled Yu Manlu and dodged it. She threw Yu Manlu in the direction of Ruan Hongling and shouted, "Take him away quickly." The cultivators of all sects present were all stunned. Zhang Lufang said in surprise, What's going on? Why did Yu Manlu summon a deity to devour him instead?" Zhang Kongyun's expression was solemn. He stared at Kamoyu on the field and said in a deep voice, "If I'm not mistaken, it should be this guy's doing." Zhang Lufang turned her eyes and saw Kamoyu standing on the field with his hands in his wide sleeves. There was a sneer at the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were fixed on Zi Yuan and the others. Everyone saw that he was standing still, and it didn't seem like he had done anything. However, Zhang Lufang was closer to him, and she was keenly aware that there was a faint fluctuation coming from his wide sleeves. It seemed that his fingers were constantly moving, and his lips were also moving gently with very subtle movements, as if he was chanting some spell in a low voice. Soon. Zhang Lufang was shocked. This Kamoyu can also control other people's summoned gods? Zhang Kongyun nodded slowly. Although the Japanese Yin-Yang Taoism was passed down from the Yin-Yang school of the Spring and Autumn period and the Warring States period, it has evolved into a unique cultivation sect in Japan over the past thousands of years. Its magic is mainly to summon gods and ghosts, so it can be said that few cultivation sects in the world can surpass them in this magic. Deng Jiao, who was very shy, couldn't help but whisper at this time, "Is there no one in our country who can summon gods and ghosts that can surpass this Kamoyu?" Zhang Kongyun shook his head and said, "It's not that there isn't. The Maoshan sect has always been famous for its talisman magic that can summon gods and ghosts. The leader of the Maoshan sect, Zhenren Buzhou, Mao Zhengye, is unrivaled in the world with his magic. Not only him, but Taoist Zhang of the Zhengye school is also a good master. His magic is exquisite and not inferior to that of Mao Zhengye. Moreover, the leader of the Chuanjin sect. Alas, let's not talk about it. They are all in closed-door training. What else can we do?" Zhang Lufang said anxiously, "Don't tell me we're just going to watch this guy act so presumptuously." Just as she finished speaking, a woman suddenly said in a clear voice, "You dare to be so arrogant with such insignificant skills?" Zhang Lufang immediately turned her head to look at the woman along with everyone else. They saw Mao Yucheng walk onto the scene, sneering as she looked at the traitorous Vajra. She was rather tall, about 1.7 meters tall, and her legs were especially slender. Although she was wearing a loose Taoist robe, she still looked tall and slender. However, when she stood in front of this 10-foot-tall Vajra, she suddenly looked small and delicate, like a child. She had to raise her head high in order to see the Vajra's comprehensive eyes. Almost there the Vajra glared at her, then turned around and smashed its steel whip at Mao Yucheng. Mao Yucheng sneered and stretched out her slender hand to receive the steel mace. Everyone saw that she was actually going to use her bare hands to receive the steel whip of the King Kong. All of them were so shocked that their expressions changed, and one after another, they loudly shouted. However, when Mao Yucheng stretched out her hand, a yin-yang pattern appeared in her palm. This yin-yang pattern spun rapidly, emitting a bright black and white light that enveloped Yao Gongxiao. When Yao Gongxiao was enveloped by this light, his entire body seemed to have become rusty. Cracking sounds could be heard, followed by a shrill scream. The Vajra warrior's body also constantly emitted black smoke. When the black smoke rose into the sky and slowly disappeared, the Vajra warrior slowly turned into countless golden light fragments and flew into the sky in an instant. Mao Yuchang turned around and looked at Kamea Yutsuan with a face full of contempt. She sneered and said, "We agreed to compete in summoning gods and ghosts, but you despicably used puppetry. What kind of ability is that?" When everyone heard this, they came to a realization. Those who didn't understand hurriedly asked, and only then did they know that the god that Yu Manlu had summoned was secretly controlled by Kamea Yutsuan. This situation was equivalent to using the opponent's strength to fight. Although the means were a little despicable, if it wasn't for the fact that his cultivation quotient was much higher than that of the caster, it would have been absolutely impossible. Yu Manlu was an inner disciple of the Penglai sect, and he was also the son of Yu Qing, a great Taoist master of the Penglai sect. His cultivation quotient of magic was also one of the best of the younger generation. No matter how bad his cultivation quotient was, he was still at the top of the yang spirit. But even so, he was still sent flying by the whip of the gods summoned by his opponent. Everyone couldn't help but look at Kamea Yutsuan in horror, thinking to themselves, how could this ordinary-looking Japanese be so powerful? And the cultivators in Japan have never heard of his name. Could it be that any random person is so strong? Is the Japanese cultivation world so powerful? For a moment, everyone was a little shocked. Saionji Tsunekatsu said leisurely, "Kamea Yutsuan wins. Now it's 1-1. Miss, do you want to go next?" Mao Yuchang snorted. She raised her head and said arrogantly, "Nonsense, if I don't go, will you?" Her words were harsh, but Saionji Tsunekatsu just smiled and whispered a few words to Kamea Yutsuan in Japanese. Kamea Yutsuan glanced at Mao Yuchang and also said a few words in Japanese. Saionji Tsunekatsu smiled and said, "Kameo Jun wants to ask you, how do you want to compete? Do you want to continue to compete in this skill of summoning ghosts?" Mao Yuchang said proudly, "Of course, I want this guy to be convinced of his defeat." Although the sects couldn't bear to see Mao Yuchang's arrogance, her words still attracted many people to cheer for her. Soon Saionji Tsunekatsu glanced at her, whispered her words to Kamea Yutsuan, and whispered a few words. Kamea Yutsuan smiled slightly, bowed slightly to Saionji Tsunekatsu, and then bowed slightly to Mao Yuchang, saying in Japanese, "Please advise me." Mao Yuchang snorted, took out a talisman from her sleeve, pinched her fingers, and recited a long incantation in a low voice, "Tianyuan Tai, Jingxi Main Army. Protect the earth, protect the unity of the spirit. Beautiful embroidered skirt, crown green scarf. Azure dragon on the left, white tiger on the right. Admire the dragon sword, the seal of 5 blessings. Commander divine officer, 3-5 generals. Evil must be cut, monsters must be destroyed. Perfunctory good fortune, enlightenment Shi'i. Evil destroyed, 5 emperors subdued. Protect the world for 10,000 years, Emperor Dirixi. Yellow dragon descended from the sky, the emperor's birthday. Jing Shao cave, eliminate demons, but not. Ask the great emperor of the 3 realms to suppress the celestial venerable, holy emperor Guan, to descend to the mortal world, as urgent as the law. She recited this incantation very quickly, and soon the talisman in her hand burned by itself. A burly man in heavy armor slowly appeared in front of her. This big man was holding a green dragon crescent moon saber, his face was like a heavy jujube, his beard was a foot long, and his phoenix eyes were shining brightly. Everyone saw that this holy Emperor Guan was really phoenix wings, green scarf split by star fire, 3 long hairs scattered behind the head, lying silkworm wrinkled liver chilled, phoenix eyes wide open, god and ghost fear, green dragon saber swaying for a long time, red rabbit altar cursing. It was really awe-inspiring. They all gasped. Ruan Hongling, who was taking care of Yu Manlu, also raised her head, pulled Zi Yuan's sleeve, and said in a low voice, I once saw Lin Yu of the Divine Fist sect invite the Holy Emperor Guan to descend to the mortal world. His divine power was amazing. I wonder how powerful the Holy Emperor Guan who directly invited him to descend to the mortal world will be. Zi Yuan said in a low voice, it's easy to invite a god into the body, but it's very difficult to invite a god to descend to the mortal world and reveal his true body. It seems that Mao Yuchang has received the true inheritance. No wonder she is so arrogant. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, who were not far away, had never seen such a scene. At this time, they were stunned. Deng Yu stammered, why does this guy look so familiar? He looks very awe-inspiring, but the hat on his head. Why is it green? Deng Yu's words were unintentional, but they almost made the cultivators next to her laugh. They saw that although Guan Yu was awe-inspiring, his green hat was really eye-catching. In the 5,000 years of history of the gods and Buddhas in China, Guan Yu was probably the only one who liked to wear a green scarf, a green crown, and a green hat to become an immortal. If it had been during the period of the Three Kingdoms, this would not have been inappropriate, but no matter how wise and brave Guan Yu was, he would not have expected that more than 1,800 years later, his green hat would be very inappropriate in the eyes of future generations. When Zhang Lufang heard Deng Yu's words, she was shocked and quickly covered her mouth. She was so scared that her face turned pale. She said in a low voice, Are you crazy? This is Guan Yu, one of the 4 marshals of the immortal world. How dare you say such disrespectful words in front of him? As she said this, she spat on the ground and said angrily, Bah, bah, spit a few times. It's too disrespectful. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao were frightened by her, and their faces couldn't help turning pale. They timidly looked at the awe-inspiring Guan Yu, then opened their red lips slightly and spat on the ground. But after spitting, Deng Yu thought for a moment and couldn't help but whisper, Hey, Shiji Lufang, why do you think Guan Yu is wearing a green hat for no reason? As soon as she said this, the Taoist priests and nuns who were close to her couldn't help laughing. However, Guan Yu was the true god that Mao Yuchang had invited to the mortal world with her great shintong. They didn't dare to be presumptuous in front of the true god, so they could only hold back their laughter, their faces twitching. The corner of Zhang Liufang's eyes twitched. She stared at Deng Yu and saw that Deng Yu's expression was simple and didn't seem to be teasing her, so she rolled her eyes and pretended to be mysterious. Do you want to know? Deng Yu nodded quickly. Yes. Deng Jiao also blinked curiously, looking like a curious baby. Zhang Lufang chuckled and pointed at the two of them. Be sincere. You're not allowed to be disrespectful to Guan Yu. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao immediately became respectful. Shiji Lufang, please tell us why Guan Yu is wearing a green hat. Zhang Lufang put her hands behind her back, shook her head, and said, Yes, why did Guan Yu wear a green hat? Deng Yu and Deng Jiao asked in unison, Why? Zhang Lufang said seriously, Because he was happy to. As soon as she finished speaking, Deng Yu and Deng Jiao were stunned. Then they both lowered their heads, their shoulders kept shaking, and their teeth were clenched tightly, for fear that they would laugh out loud if they relaxed. Many cultivators nearby also burst into laughter. They couldn't help covering their stomachs and rushing out of the field. As soon as they turned the corner and hid, they couldn't help but burst into laughter. Zhang Kongyun had heard their conversation clearly. At this time, he couldn't help but turn his head angrily and shout, How dare you? How dare you make such a joke in front of a true god? Do you want to be kicked out of the sect? Zhang Lufang, Deng Yu, and Deng Jiao looked at each other and secretly grimaced, not daring to say anything more. After laughing for a while, Deng Yu said to Zhang Lufang in a low voice, Shiji Lufang, it's a pity that you don't know Li Yundong. If you knew him, they would be a pair of clowns. He also likes to joke. In the past, he often made some funny jokes at school. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao couldn't help but think of their days at school, especially what Li Yundong had done there. The two of them suddenly smiled and couldn't help laughing. Zhang Lufang asked curiously, Really? Every time I see him, he looks serious and has the demeanor of a leader. If you hadn't told me, I really wouldn't have been able to tell. Deng Yu wanted to say more, but Zhang Kongyun turned around angrily and stared at them unkindly. He scolded in a low voice, ****, the battle is coming. How can you still be in the mood to gossip about such messy things? Only then did the three of them stop chattering and concentrate on watching the match. At this time, they saw that Kamo Yutsuan finally took out his hands from his sleeves and threw out a talisman, but everyone's eyes were fixed on him. The talisman floated to the ground, but there was no movement. For a while, everyone looked at each other in dismay, and then roared with laughter. Huh, did this fool throw the wrong talisman? Why is there no movement at all? I'm dying of laughter. Is this the magic of the Japanese? Hee hee, be careful not to be fined for throwing confetti. The cultivators of various sects on the sidelines ridiculed him, but Kamea Yutsuan showed a complacent and sinister smile. Although Mao Yuchang was proud and conceited, she couldn't help but feel a chill in her heart when she saw Kamea Yutsuan's expression. Just as she felt strange, she felt a gust of wind rushing toward her, as if there was an invisible beast in front of her. Mao Yuchang's face changed greatly. With a thought, Guan Yu, who had descended to the mortal world, appeared in front of her in an instant. As soon as he held the green dragon crescent blade in his hand horizontally, he heard a clang. Guan Yu, with his green dragon crescent blade, hit Mao Yuchang like a cannonball, and flew out. The ridicule of the crowd suddenly stopped, and their eyes bulged. No way, this Guan Yu was also sent flying in just one round? Is this Japanese so powerful? Thank you for your blessings. There are too many messages, so I can't reply to them one by one. Sorry, hee hee. Chapter 696. When everyone saw that Mao Yuchang, who had been arrogant before, had been released, they were all shocked. Ruan Hongling and Zi Yuan had just been praising Mao Yuchang, but now they were suddenly speechless and looked at each other. Ruan Hongling said dryly, Shiji, what's going on? Mao Yuchang can't be so weak, can she? Zi Yuan's face darkened. After thinking for a while, she suddenly reacted and blurted out, I know. As soon as she finished speaking, she saw a figure return to the field like a gust of wind. It was Mao Yuchang, who had been blown away. After all, Mao Yuchang was a Jinshin master and a direct descendant of the Mao Shan sect. She had been cultivating since she was in her mother's womb, so how could she be defeated so easily? She glared at Kamiyukin, pinched her fingers, pressed them against her forehead, and recited the incantation in a rapid voice. The heaven law is clear, the earth law is spirit, the yin and yang are refined, the water spirit appears, the spirit light is absorbed by water, the heaven and the earth are connected, the dharma is carried out, the yin-yang dharma mirror, the true form appears, the true form appears. I am under the command of Sanmao Jinjuan, open the heavenly eye. It's as urgent as the law. Mao Yuchang let out a loud shout, and a slit appeared between her eyebrows, revealing a third eye that was radiating with a brilliant light. Zi Yuan saw that her third eye was different from Li Yunyang's wisdom king vertical pupil. Mao Yuchang's heavenly eye was the same as a normal person's eye. It was horizontal, and it looked no different from an ordinary person's, except that there was an extra eye. She nodded to herself and said, Mao Yuchang is really smart. She can see that the ghost summoned by Kamiyukin is invisible. She opened the yin-yang dharma eye and reacted very quickly. No wonder she is an inner disciple of a famous sect. Ruan Hongling said curiously, can't the demon-subduing emperor of the three realms see an invisible monster? He can't be so dirty, can he? Zi Yuan laughed and said, although Emperor Guansheng is powerful, in terms of rank, he is only one of the four marshals of Taoism. You know what the four marshals usually do in the Hall of Nine Heavens, don't you? Ruan Hongling suddenly said, I remember. Wen Xiong, one of the four marshals, is in charge of the southern heavenly gate. I think Lord Guan Yu is the same. It turns out that Guan Yu is just a small security guard in the heavenly palace. After that, her awe of Guan Yu weakened a lot. She said worriedly, "Is Guan Yu really so bad that he can't beat the Japanese? The stronger the caster is, the stronger he will be." Mao Yuchang didn't open her heaven eye before, so Holy Emperor Guan couldn't see this invisible monster. Now that she has opened her heaven eye, I believe Holy Emperor Guan should be able to see it. Wan Hongling curled her lips and said, "I see." I thought Guan Yu was omnipotent. The two of them were talking on the sidelines. Although their voices were soft, Mao Yuchang, who was not far away, still heard every word. She was angry, hateful, ashamed, and annoyed. After she opened her heaven eye, her mind was connected with Guan Yu, who had summoned him to the mortal world. When Guan Yu saw the 2-meter-tall, ferocious-looking Shikigami standing in front of him, he immediately swung the green dragon crescent moon knife in his hand and slashed at it. The air around him seemed to have been sucked dry by this slash. The momentum of the knife was violent and fierce, like a raging fire, suffocating people. Everyone in the Japanese cultivation world couldn't help but be shocked. The Japanese were fond of reading the Three Kingdoms, and they also admired Guan Yu, the sage of martial arts who was loyal and righteous. They saw that although Guan Yu had suffered a small loss before, his subsequent slash was aggressive and had the divine power of the sage of martial arts. For a moment, many people were afraid. On the field, Kamo Yutsuan's eyes also flashed with fear. As soon as he was afraid, the Shikigami who was connected with him also became timid. But as soon as his Shikigami retreated, Kamo Mirror of the Kamo family suddenly shouted in Japanese, "Idiot, how can you retreat in front of the enemy?" Kamo Yutsuan's body shook. He gritted his teeth and directed the Shikigami to bypass the Holy Emperor Guan, who was rushing over, and rushed toward Mao Yuchang. Kamo Yutsuan saw that Mao Yuchang had been maintaining the finger gestures and posture of opening her heaven eye after opening her heaven eye and seeing his Shikigami. He secretly guessed that this heaven eye spell would be maintained all the time, so he was betting on this point. If Mao Yuchang dodged, not only would she lose her spirit, but the heaven eye spell might also disappear. At that time, he would have the upper hand again. And Mao Yuchang was not easy to deal with. When she saw the opponent's Shikigami rushing toward her, how could she not know what the opponent was planning? If it had been in normal times, she might have temporarily avoided it. But now that she was proud and arrogant, how could she stand it when she heard the private conversation between Ziyuan and Wan Hongling? Mao Yuchang gritted her teeth. Relying on her Jinshin to protect herself, she ignored the Shikigami who was rushing over. Instead, she stared at Kamo Yutsuan angrily, controlling Holy Emperor Guan to swing his sword at Kamo Yutsuan. The situation on the field changed in an instant. Although Holy Emperor Guan's status in the heaven realm was not high, he was still a marshal of heaven. In the blink of an eye, he rushed in front of Kamo Yutsuan and chopped down with his sword. Kamo Yutsuan saw that the sword was in front of him in the blink of an eye. Although it had not yet reached his body, the momentum of the sword had already caused goosebumps to explode all over his body. He couldn't help but be shocked to the extreme. Subconsciously, he wanted to jump and dodge. But how could his dodge compare to the speed of Holy Emperor Guan's sword? With a crack, one of his arms was cut off. The severed arm flew in the air, and blood spurted out. On the other side, almost at the same time, the Shikigami summoned by Kamo Yutsuan had already rushed in front of Mao Yuchang. The fingers of this Shikigami were as sharp as iron hooks, and they suddenly stabbed toward Mao Yuchang's abdomen. Mao Yuchang usually did not walk around in the secular world, and she rarely fought with others, especially in a fight of life and death like the one in front of her. Soon she wanted to take this blow head-on, but she did not know that this Shikigami was a ghost god raised by the Kamo family for more than 1,000 years. It was far from being comparable to an ordinary ghost. Moreover, Kamo Yutsuan himself was also a master of the Jinshin level. The 5 fingers of this Shikigami were as sharp as knives, and there was a golden edge at the fingertips, which was specialized in breaking the protective Jinshin. Mao Yuchang saw the 5 fingers of the Shikigami pierce into her abdomen, and she suddenly felt a sharp pain all over her body. The 5 elements in her body were broken, and the protective Jinshin collapsed in an instant. Her whole body was lifted high by the Shikigami, and then she was thrown heavily to the ground like a rag bag. Mao Yuchang let out a scream and spat out a mouthful of blood. She covered her bleeding abdomen with her hand, and her whole body curled up into a ball. When everyone saw this scene, they immediately shouted. The Japanese cultivators rushed forward and supported Kamo Yutsuan, whose arm had been cut off. They all began to curse the Chinese cultivators. The Chinese cultivators were also shocked. Su Yangzi shouted angrily and rushed forward. He quickly bent over in front of Mao Yuchang, and his fingers quickly pointed at her abdomen a few times. Ziyuan also quickly stepped forward, took out a jade bottle from her arms, and said in a deep voice, "Jinren Su Yangzi, this is the 9-turn-do pill. Do you think it's useful?" Su Yangzi looked up at her and felt very grateful. Just as he was about to reach out to take it, he heard Mao Yuchang moan and struggle to say, "I don't want her medicine. Our Mao Shan sect has our own." Master Su Yangzi's face stiffened. He lowered his head and looked at his stubborn niece. He sighed and smiled apologetically at Ziyuan. Then, he took out a small medicine bottle from his bosom and quickly poured a few pills into Mao Yuchang's mouth. Ruan Hongling, who was standing to one side, couldn't stand it and said in a low voice, "You treat my kindness as evil." Shiji, you. However, Ziyuan raised her hand and interrupted her. She said in a low voice, "Don't say such things in front of the enemy. Jinren Yuchang and Kamo Yutsuan are fighting. I'm afraid that there will be a problem." Indeed, as Ziyuan had said, there had been some scruples when the two sides had fought before. They were afraid of causing trouble, especially when Ziyuan had fought with Elder Ono. It had been a new and peaceful fight, so there had been no anger on both sides for a while. But now, Mao Yuchang and Kamo Yutsuan had lost an arm, and the other had been seriously injured and vomited blood. The eyes of the cultivators on the field were red. They confronted each other and were about to fight. When Su Yangzi saw that Mao Yuchang had closed her eyes and fallen asleep after taking the pill, he temporarily relaxed. He stood up and glared at the Japanese cultivators with hatred in his eyes. Just as he was about to step forward, he heard Ziyuan say in a low voice, "Jinren Su Yangzi, each sect can only send one person. Have you forgotten?" Su Yangzi suddenly stopped and clenched his fists so hard that they cracked. He was not the only one who was angry. In the Japanese cultivation world, there was more than one person who was on good terms with Kamo Yutsuan. Soon, a tall monk jumped out of the crowd. This monk was about 30 years old, and he was Kamoya's best friend. Although one of them practiced Buddhism and the other practiced yin-yang, although their paths were different, they were like-minded. They often drank together, had fun, and talked about cultivation methods. When he saw that his friend's arm had been cut off, he couldn't bear it anymore. He jumped onto the field with a Zen knife in his hand, raised his two thick eyebrows, and angrily roared, "I'm Takahashi Shota of the Pure Land School. You hurt my best friend. I want to avenge him." As soon as he finished speaking, a young Taoist jumped into the field, pointed at him angrily, and shouted, "Bah, are you the only one injured?" Takahashi Shota had a rough appearance, and his eyes were as wide as copper bells. "Who are you?" The young Taoist admired Mao Yuchang's beauty and wanted to say a few words for her. He said loudly, "I'm Zhou Kunshan of the Jinshan sect, you." But before he could finish his words, he saw Takahashi Shota roar angrily. He raised his Zen knife high and slashed at Zhou Kunshan's face. When Zhou Kunshan saw that his saber was still more than 10 meters away, he sneered. Just as he was about to taunt him, he suddenly found his body flying up lightly. Then he found himself lying on the ground. His lower body was still standing, and blood was spurting out like a fountain from the lower half of his body. Only then did Zhou Kunshan realize that he had been split into two by Takahashi Shota. He was horrified and was about to escape when he saw Takahashi Shota take a step forward and slash at his yang spirit again. With a bang, Takahashi Shota's knife smashed Zhou Kunshan's yang spirit into pieces in an instant. Takahashi Shota glared at the cultivators of the various sects on the field with a ferocious face and said fiercely, "Who's next to die?" For a moment, the field fell into a very short and terrible silence. The cultivators of all sects knew that a blood feud had been formed between the two sides. The warm situation just now no longer existed. An extremely terrible bloody battle was inevitable. Chapter 697. Killing was just a matter of nodding one's head to the ground. For cultivators, although the destruction of their bodies was a great hatred, it was not a matter of life and death. However, once the yang spirit was killed, it would be a great hatred for a cultivator. In the eyes of cultivators, the destruction of the body and soul was the same as the annihilation of the whole family. When Takahashi Shota was in his 20s, he had committed several bloody cases in Hokkaido, Japan. At that time, it was a sensation. Later, he was chased by the Metropolitan Police Department and had no way to escape. He had to change his name, hide his identity, and join Buddhism for protection. Although Takahashi Shota was a sinner, he was talented and had great wisdom. After cultivating for more than 10 years, he had reached the same cultivation realm as the Jinshin. In addition, his teacher found that although his cultivation was advancing very fast, there was always a deep hostility in his nature. No matter what scriptures he chanted or how many rituals he performed, this hostility could not be dispelled. Therefore, in order to make the best use of everything and talents, Takahashi Shota was quickly selected to join the team of monk soldiers. In less than 2 years, he was promoted to guardian monk. Among the cultivation sects in the world, except for Islam, which wrote the Holy War in the scripture and was extremely aggressive, the monk soldiers of the Pure Land sect could be said to be the most aggressive group of cultivators. Although each sect also had guardian monks, they were definitely the most maverick and the most brave. Whether it was Tibetan Buddhism, original Buddhism, or other Buddhist sects in Japan, they always covered up the matter of killing guardian monks. The weapons they used were mostly blunt weapons such as Buddhist staffs and Vajra pestles. However, the Pure Land sect was different. This was the most powerful cultivation sect in the Buddhist cultivation world in Japan. It had a long history of using force to protect and pass on the Dharma. These monk soldiers chanted Buddha's Infinite Life Sutra and carried killing knives in their hands. After hundreds of years, there were countless corpses under the knives of the monk soldiers of the Pure Land sect. In the Kamakura period of Japan, although the founder of the Pure Land True sect of Japan was the sage Himron, the one who truly established the Pure Land True sect's main Yamamoto Hope Temple was actually the 8th generation of the Pure Land True sect's Dharma master, Master Renru, who established it in the Yamamoto region of Japan in 48 AD. At that time, in order to preach, Master Lienru instigated the Pure Land True sect's sect to incite peasant uprisings throughout Japan, opposing the rule of the various daimyo in an attempt to establish a Buddhist religious state. This matter was known in Japanese history as the famous Uniichi Kei. Kei meant an uprising. It was also because the Uniichi sect's Uniichi Kei was too rampant that wherever there were people in Japan, there would be Buddhists of the Uniichi sect. This caused the other Buddhist sects in Japan to be very dissatisfied and began to join forces to suppress the Pure Land sect. Almost there in 55 AD, the Tiantai sect's by Jin Mountains monk soldiers joined forces with the Hexagon family's army to attack the Pure Land sect's original Wish Temple. The original Wish Temple built by Master Lien Ru was burned to ashes by them. Because of this, the 10th Dharma master of the Pure Land sect, Master Lien Ru, reflected on this painful experience and believed that the Pure Land sect could not be without its own monk soldiers. Therefore, after he rebuilt the original Wish Temple in Japan's Ishiyama, he established the Imperial Shadow Hall, a troop of monk soldiers specifically under the command of the Pure Land sect's Dharma master. At that time, the Pure Land True sect's power was too great and could easily cause an uprising. No matter what cruel and ruthless methods the daimyo used, they were unable to eradicate the power of the sect. Its Imperial Shadow Hall was also too valiant and abnormal. So many daimyo in Japan did not dare to offend the original Wish Temple. If Reverend Jingru, the 10th Dharma master of the Pure Land True sect, who established the troop of monk soldiers, was still a bit bashful and secretive, then the 11th Dharma master of the Pure Land True sect, Reverend Jingru, simply tore off the last shameful cloth and openly commanded the monk soldiers to throw themselves into the war for hegemony of the world. In the third year of Japan's Yongroku, that is, the 11th Dharma master Lienru shook the Ekizan and Kaga's Yonkue movement and helped Takeda Shingen, who was known as the Tiger of Kase, to fight against Usuji Kenshin, who was known as the Dragon of Ekigo. After that, the Pure Land True sect controlled by the Dharma master Lienru concluded the famous Three Covenants with Takeda Shingen in the 8th year of Yongroku, that is, in the year 565 AD, forming a strong military alliance. Later, this Lord Shinru married the adopted daughter of Hosokawa Haramoto, and created the famous Iron Triangle military alliance in Japanese history, Pure Land sect, Takeda Shingen, and Asakura Yashiki. In the following war, the monk soldiers of the Pure Land sect shone brilliantly. The valiant fighting power and terrifying fighting will of the Imperial Shadow Hall monk soldiers caused the ambitious and ruthless Oda Nobunaga of the Warring States period to suffer many defeats. At that time, there were countless daimyo and even famous generals who died under these monk soldiers who said, "Umitba," and carried murderous butcher knives. After that, the power of the Pure Land True sect expanded too terrifyingly. Only the Pure Land True sect, Otani sect, had more than 10 million believers. Its powerful power caused the government of Tokugawa Ieyasu to be afraid and suppressed. The power of the Pure Land True sect gradually declined, and slowly the Imperial Shadow Hall also withdrew from the view of the world. Soon, however, although this monk soldier gradually declined with the strength of the sect, this did not prevent it from being active on the stage of history. During World War II, Neon launched the War of Invasion of China. Most of the religious sects in Neon followed the military government to invade the country, and the Pure Land True sect was particularly active. Other cultivation sects often only sent cultivators who followed the army to be responsible for rescue, condolences, prayers, burials, and other matters. However, the monk soldiers of the Imperial Shadow Hall once again showed the world their ferocious face of chanting Buddhist scriptures and carrying butcher knives. In recent years, the Imperial Shadow Hall of the Pure Land True sect had slowly hidden from the world. However, Takahashi Shota's / made the cultivators of various sects suddenly recall the tragic memory from decades ago. Takahashi Shota was burly, and the Zen knife in his hand was very different from the traditional samurai sword of Neon. This knife was wide, the back was thick, and the tip was slightly pointed, which made it easy to chop and stab. There were 2 deep bloodletting grooves on the body of the knife. Between the bloodletting grooves and the cold and sharp blade, there were exquisite Buddhist patterns engraved. At a glance, everyone saw that the big knife, which was carved with the image of Umitba, was dripping with blood, which was indescribably terrible and ferocious. Saionji Tsunekatsu saw that Takahashi Shota had gone forward to kill a cultivator of Wuxia without his consent. He frowned and couldn't help shouting, "Takahashi, why did you do such a cruel thing?" For Saionji Tsunekatsu and the other cultivators of various sects, they did not intend to form such an unsolvable blood feud with the cultivation world of Wuxia. However, Takahashi Shota's actions caught them off guard and made them all furious. However, Takahashi Shota turned his head, held the butcher knife in his hand, and said with a ferocious face, "Tsunekatsu, do you want to ask me for advice?" Wuxia in Japan had a deep spirit of martial arts, which was vividly reflected in the young monk of Jinyin Tantrism, Saionji Tsunekatsu. However, it was the Imperial Shadow Hall monk soldiers of the Pure Land School who really carried the martial arts to the extreme, to the point of perversion. Saionji Tsunekatsu knew very well that this group of monk soldiers of the Imperial Shadow Hall was a group of killing machines that existed in the world to kill people. They would not be polite to him. In this situation, as long as he said a few wrong words, he was afraid that the other side would cut him with the knife. Even though Saionji Tsunekatsu had received the 5 parts of Kaisai Hikaryuni's enlightenment, his cultivation at this time was not much higher than that of Takahashi Shota. Especially at this time, Takahashi Shota had killed Zhou Kunshin with a knife. His whole body was surrounded by murderous intent, and his whole face was as ferocious as a ghost. Even a guardian like him could not help but be frightened and did not dare to fight with him head-on. Saionji Tsunekatsu took a step back and involuntarily said, "Why should I ask you for advice?" Takahashi Shota said ferociously, "You are just a vanguard. Why are you pointing at me? Just watch from the side. You are too polite to them. Today, I will sweep away these incompetent scoundrels in the Chinese cultivation world." He and Saionji Tsunekatsu were talking in Japanese. Although few of the cultivators in the field could understand Japanese, everyone could understand Takahashi Shota's behavior of killing Zhou Kunshin, as well as his ferocious expression afterwards. After a brief moment of silence, the various sects suddenly let out a roar that sounded like a volcanic eruption. "CK your mother, how dare you do such a cruel thing? Kill him, let him pay with his life." "Bah, pay with his life? Paying with his life is light. I want to crush his body into powder and destroy his yang spirit into pieces." Zhou Kunshin was not the only one from Penglai's sect who came to participate in this battle. Two silhouettes dashed into the field. One of them pounced on Zhou Kunshin's corpse, crying loudly, "Senior Marshal Brother." The other one glared at Takahashi Shota with bloodshot eyes. Zi Yuan, who was watching from the side, subconsciously exclaimed, "No, don't go." As soon as she finished speaking, she saw Takahashi Shota slash down with a grim smile. The tip of the saber drew a golden saber aura and cut the cultivator in front of him into two pieces. With a puff sound, the cultivator's body flew to the left and right. The internal organs of his chest and abdomen flowed all over the ground. For a moment, the huge Taoist field was full of blood, and the smell of blood was overwhelming. The eyes of all the cultivators in the Hua sect suddenly turned red. Zi Yuan saw that the man had been killed. His yang spirit had been shattered before it could even fly out. She suddenly widened her eyes and clenched her fists. Although Wan Hongling was impulsive and often fought with others, she had never seen such a ferocious and terrifying scene. She was so scared that she felt like vomiting. She pulled Zi Yuan's arm and said in a trembling voice, "Shiji Zi Yuan, how could this monk be so cruel?" Zi Yuan's body trembled slightly. She gritted her teeth and said, "This is the soldier monk of the Imperial Shadow Hall, the most terrifying killing machine in the world, the most ferocious monk." Wan Hongling stared at Takahashi Shota, who was laughing wildly on the field. She was both afraid and angry. She said with hatred and fear, "Don't let this guy go. He must pay with his blood." Zi Yuan's face was cold and she didn't say anything. She just stared at Takahashi Shota, and a rare murderous look gradually appeared in the corners of her eyes. Not far away, Zhang Huashui, who was as fierce as fire and hated evil as his enemy, roared. He was about to rush forward like a tiger, but his shoulder was suddenly grabbed by Zhang Tongtian. Zhang Huashui turned his head and roared, "Shiji, let go, or I'll fall out with you." Zhang Tongtian said with a sullen face, "Shiji, the knife in this guy's hand is a little strange. Once it's cut, both body and soul will be injured. I'm afraid it's a powerful magical weapon that specializes in breaking golden bodies. You are impulsive and easily provoked by him. Let me go." Seeing that his Shiji was not going to stop him, Zhang Huashui immediately stopped, gritted his teeth, and said, "No, Shiji, you are the most respected person in the world. You are the only one who has inherited Master's true teachings. If anything happens to you, I'm afraid that our Qingqing sect will end here. Let me go. I have a way to deal with this bastard." Zhang Tongtian stared at Zhang Huashui. He clenched his fists on Zhang Huashui's shoulders and said, "You must win." Zhang Huashui smiled angrily. "Not only will I win, but I will also tear this bastard to pieces." After that, he strode toward the field. Chapter 698. When Zhang Ling of the Jingyi school saw that Takahashi Shota had killed 2 people in a row on Mount Longhu, she was so angry that her whole body trembled. With a roar, a blazing flame suddenly ignited in her hand. She moved and was about to pounce on Takahashi Shota, but as soon as she moved, she was grabbed by Zhang Kongyun. Zhang Ling turned her head and said sternly, "Let go." Zhang Kongyun grabbed Zhang Ling's wrist tightly, and his fingers were like iron hoops. He said in a deep voice, "Eldest Shiji, you can't go. You're no match for him. Let me go." Zhang Ling stopped and said in a cold voice, "Well, you must win. When has Arjuni school ever been bullied like this?" Zhang Kongyun did not answer her. He just stared at Takahashi Shota and the bloody butcher knife in his hand. He tightened his belt. As soon as he walked to the field, he saw Zhang Huashui striding in. Then, two middle-aged cultivators from other sects also entered the field angrily. They looked at each other and were slightly stunned. Just as Zhang Kongyun was about to speak, he heard Zhang Huashui roar, "Are you guys going to compete with me? Get out of here. I'll beat whoever fights with me first." Zhang Huashui was one of the famous, top 10 golden body experts in the cultivation world, and also had the nickname, Fierce Zhang Fei. He had a full beard on his face, and at this time, his beard and hair were all fluttering. His skin was also quite dark, and his eyes were even more angry like copper bells. His appearance really looked like the resurrection of Zhang Ida, and his appearance was terrifying. His roar made Zhang Kongyun and the other two look at each other and shake their heads secretly. Zhang Kongyun bowed slightly to Zhang Huashui and said in a loud voice, "Zhenren Zhang, be careful of his saber." After that, he retreated. Zhang Huashui nodded slightly to Zhang Kongyun, indicating that he was grateful for his support. He slowly took out a 3-foot-long sword from behind him and flicked it with his finger, making a buzzing sound. Zhang Huashui glared at Takahashi Shota, gritted his teeth, and said, "If you have any last words, hurry up and say them." At this time, the sects were already furious, and they all shouted, "Zhenren Zhang, why are you talking to him? Go up and kill him." Takahashi Shota saw that after he entered the field, he was holding a 3-foot-long Qingfeng sword. The Qingfeng sword was surrounded by a faint green light. Although it didn't look very powerful, anyone with a discerning eye could tell at a glance that it was not an ordinary weapon. A strange light flashed in Takahashi Shota's eyes. He spoke in Japanese and said, "Hey, show me this sword." Just as Huashui finished speaking, Saionji Tsunekatsu was Shota. He said, "Zhang Huashui Shota, Huashui." Chang said, he suddenly, Saiyanwi Shota Shota Huashui Taiji Shota. Takahashi Shota also walked forward casually. He stretched out his furry claws and grabbed the sword. He pulled it out with a clang. While looking at the exquisite patterns on the sword, he sighed. "It's really a good sword. I like it. I want this sword." As soon as he finished speaking, he grinned grimly and waved the sword in his hand toward Zhang Huashui. Zhang Huashui seemed to have expected this. He put his index and middle fingers together and made a sword finger. His palm was facing up, and the tips of his 2 fingers were pointing upward. He shouted, "Go!" The sword in Takahashi Shota's hand immediately jumped up and stabbed toward Takahashi Shota's throat uncontrollably. When the crowd saw that Zhang Huashui had taken the initiative to give up the sword in his hand, they couldn't help exclaiming, "Zhenren Zhang, be careful." Especially when they saw Takahashi Shota's sword fall, they were so scared that they couldn't breathe. But in the blink of an eye, Zhang Huashui immediately reversed the unfavorable situation. Only then did they understand that it was a trick by Zhang Huashui. Zhang Kongyun breathed a sigh of relief and said to Zhang Ling, who was watching the field nervously, "This fierce Zhang Fei is not just brave. He even knows how to use a trick." Zhang Ling stared at the scene and did not speak, but Zhang Lufang, who was on the side, said, "Master, Zhang Fei is rough but meticulous. He is fierce but not reckless. Otherwise, how could he capture General Yan Yan alive? I think this Zhenren Zhang Huashui's nickname, Fierce Zhang Fei, is worthy of it." Zhang Kongyun nodded slightly and stared nervously at the field, no longer speaking. Takahashi Shota didn't expect that the sword in his hand would jump up and bite him. He was furious, and the long saber in his hand fell toward the sword. With a clang, the tip of the long sword and the blade of the long saber collided fiercely. After a burst of sparks, they immediately swung away. Zhang Huashui immediately leaned forward and punched Takahashi Shota's chest. Takahashi Shota saw that his punch was like a mountain-splitting stone. It was powerful and unstoppable. Even a mountain seemed to be smashed by his punch. Takahashi Shota roared. He turned his body and took a step back, dodging Zhang Huashui's punch. Then, with the momentum of his body's rotation, he quickly chopped down with his saber. Although Takahashi Shota avoided Zhang Huashui's punch, the fist aura surged out of his fist and hit Takahashi Shota's body solidly. Takahashi Shota's whole body shook violently, and a golden light flashed across his body. The protective gang chi in his body was almost shattered. He took the force of the fist aura and took a deep breath. The steel saber in his hand moved faster, chopping toward Zhang Huashui's head. Zhang Huashui originally thought that his punch would make the evil Japanese monk fly out like a stone, but he didn't expect that the monk would take it head-on. Instead, the saber slashed toward his head aggressively. Zhang Huashui was surprised, but he didn't panic at all. He sneered and didn't retreat. Instead, he moved forward. With a leap, he appeared in front of Takahashi Shota. Everyone on the scene saw him closing in on Zhang Huashui. They all cheered loudly. Those with discerning eyes could see at a glance that Zhang Huashui's move of advancing and retreating was really exquisite. The long saber in Takahashi Shota's hand was very strange. Not to mention the fierce gang chi, it could kill a young spirit master from more than 10 meters away. If Zhang Huashui retreated, although he could avoid the steel saber, he couldn't avoid the gang chi. As he approached, he was just in the blind spot of Takahashi Shota's hands. When the hilt of the steel saber fell, it just fell on his shoulder. How could it hurt him? As Zhang Huashui approached, he immediately took the initiative. His hands moved quickly, like beating drums. His fists fell like rain, hitting Takahashi Shota's chest. The sound of this short fight was like a storm. The cultivators of all sects on the field only felt that they had vented their anger. As soon as they cheered, they saw Takahashi Shota suddenly roar. He gritted his teeth and spat a mouthful of blood at Zhang Huashui's head. A battle between masters only lasted for a moment. When one's realm reached the level of a Jinshin master, the battle of magic weapons was secondary, especially for masters like them. This kind of close combat was really the most dangerous thing in the world, and the outcome could be decided in the blink of an eye. Zhang Huashui didn't expect Takahashi Shota to fight back like this. At this time, he and Takahashi Shota were almost face to face. At such a close distance, he was suddenly attacked by his opponent. In particular, there was a fierce wind in the opponent's mouthful of blood. Obviously, there was a hard object mixed in it, aiming at his eyes. Although a Jinshin master could protect his body with a strong Jinshin, he couldn't protect his eyes. Moreover, Takahashi Shota was a Jinshin master himself, so his Jinshin could naturally break through the Jinshin. Zhang Huashui only had time to close his eyes subconsciously before he felt a sharp pain in front of his eyes, as if his eyes had been stabbed by an iron bar. He let out a loud roar and knew that the situation was not good. He immediately controlled his personal sword to draw a sword flower in front of his body, tightly protecting his body, and then he frantically retreated. Sure enough, Takahashi Shota's attack was successful. He immediately brandished his broadsword and chopped it down. The steel broadsword and the long sword fought fiercely. Everyone could only see the light of the sword and sparks flying in all directions. When the sword and the knife separated again, Zhang Huashui had already fallen to the side of the field. Zhang Tongtian rushed forward and supported his body. Zhang Tongtian looked over and saw that Zhang Huashui's tightly closed eyelids were red. He let out a heart-wrenching roar and shouted, "It hurts so much. My eyes." Zhang Tongtian grabbed him and said in a deep voice, "Shirdi, don't move. Let me see." Zhang Huashui closed his eyes tightly and roared, "Shirdi, let me go. I'm going to kill this beast." My eyes, ah. Zhang Tongtian pressed Zhang Huashui tightly with both hands and said angrily, don't be impulsive. You've already lost. Sure di, as long as you're alive, there's hope. Zhang Huashui turned a deaf ear to him and roared, ready to rush up again. Zhang Tongtian's eyes were red. He used his palm as a knife and slashed at Zhang Huashui's neck, making him faint. He turned his head and ordered his disciples to take Zhang Huashui off the field, while he glared at Takahashi Shota with sharp eyes. Takahashi Shota originally wanted to take advantage of the situation to chase after Zhang Huashui and take his life with one blow, but he suddenly saw a long sword hanging in the air behind Zhang Tongtian. The long sword was blooming with three-colored divine light, majestic and awe-inspiring. Although Takahashi Shota was fierce and arrogant, he was not a fool. At a glance, he could tell that this was one of the best magic swords in the Chinese cultivation world. His heart trembled and he immediately stopped, watching Zhang Tongtian bring Zhang Huashui into the crowd from afar. Zhang Tongtian glared at Zhang Huashui for a long time. After his chest rose and fell violently, he snorted angrily, our Qingqing sect has lost. After that, he turned his head and walked into the crowd. After listening to Saionji Tsunekatsu's translation, Takahashi Shota laughed proudly. As soon as he laughed, blood immediately flowed out of his mouth. Some sharp-eyed people found that the tongue in his mouth had been cut short, and the cut was badly mutilated. Zhang Ling's face changed in horror and she exclaimed in a low voice, could it be that this guy bit off his tongue just now and used it to hurt Zhang Tongtian? Zhang Lufang looked at the evil monk on the field who didn't know what pain was, and her body trembled slightly. She said in a trembling voice, it's enough for him to spit out a mouthful of blood. Why did he bite off his tongue? Zhang Kongyun also looked frightened. Do you think this mouthful of blood was the blood that Zhang Huashui had hurt him with a series of punches? No, you're wrong. The strongest parts of a cultivator are the 5 internal organs. If the 5 internal organs were beaten to the point of bleeding, then Takahashi Shota would have been dead long ago. How could he have spat out such a fierce gang strength? He bit off his tongue to spit out this mouthful of flesh and blood. This person is really terrible. I heard that the monks of the Imperial Shadow Hall of the Pure Land sect have been trained to be killing machines that don't know pain and fear. I didn't expect to see it today. It's true. Takahashi Shota had won by biting the tip of his tongue. Blood kept gushing out of his mouth, but his face was triumphant. He had no intention of leaving the field at all. He grinned, and his short tongue looked particularly ferocious and terrifying in the eyes of the crowd. He looked proud and said vaguely, who else wants to die? Zhang Kongyun's face changed. Just as he was about to step forward, he saw a slender hand on his shoulder. Zhang Kongyun turned his head and saw Zi Yuan saying with a cold face, Jinren Kongyun, let me do it. Chapter 699 /name book, building, comma, Zhang Kongyun turned his head to look at Zi Yuan, and then said in a deep voice, Zi Yuan, do you want to compete with me for the limelight? Zi Yuan was stunned and said, I wouldn't dare. But this monk is too fierce. Jinren Kongyun, you are the pillar of our Zhengyi school. If anything happens to you. Zhang Kongyun was furious. He pulled a long face and said, are you looking down on me? Or do you think that I'm too old to wield a saber or a sword? Zi Yuan saw that Zhang Kongyun's fighting spirit was surging. She hesitated a little, but Zhang Kongyun said in a low voice, Zi Yuan, this monk is too fierce. Even I am not sure if I can defeat him. You are still young and have the potential to improve your cultivation. Don't fall here and affect your future cultivation. Happy face, she whispered to Zhang Kongyun, Jinren Kongyun, aren't you afraid that it will affect your cultivation? Zhang Kongyun smiled slightly and gave Zi Yuan a meaningful look. He strode onto the stage and said loudly, Zhang Kongyun of the Zhengyi school is here. Takahashi Shota is here to die. At this time, the two sides had already formed a deep grudge. Zhang Kongyun entered the arena in anger. He did not even have the basic etiquette and simply called out his name. When the cultivators of the various sects saw him enter the arena, their expressions suddenly froze and they whispered to each other, "The Jingyi school has finally entered the arena. I wonder if he can win." He will definitely win. Zhang Kongyun is one of the top 10 golden body experts who became famous very early. It's impossible for him to lose. That's not necessarily true. Didn't Zhang Huashui also lose just now? Alas, Zhang Huashui is too impulsive. Why did he have to fight this Japanese in close combat? What should I do if I don't engage in close combat? Didn't you see how fierce that saber is? It's like a Dharma treasure that specializes in breaking golden bodies. If you fight from afar, what will you do if the monk slashes at you with his saber energy? Only close combat and a dangerous battle could be won. Alas, what a pity. I didn't expect this Japanese to be so fierce. He actually injured himself to win. Terrifying, truly terrifying. There was a huge difference between the Taoist cultivators of Hua and the Buddhist cultivators of Japan. The Taoist cultivators never harmed themselves. They were a group of people who cherished their own bodies the most in the world. They believed that blood and flesh came from their parents, so there was no reason for them to hurt themselves. In order to cultivate their moral character, they took care of their lives in an orderly manner. They clearly separated what they could eat and what they couldn't eat. Moreover, they persisted in doing so for decades. Happy face, this group of people was elegant but not ferocious. Cultivators of the Taoist faction didn't cultivate to fight and kill. They wanted to become immortals and go to the 9 heavens immortal world. Therefore, they cultivated great arts and techniques instead of killing. However, the Buddhist cultivators of Japan were different. The Pure Land True sect was even more different. In the Buddhist cultivation sects all over the world, everyone recognized a point of view, that was, India's Buddha, China's Dharma, and Japan's Buddhist monks. It meant that India was the birthplace of Buddhism, so the gods of Buddhism originated from India. Therefore, there was the saying of India's Buddha. However, the real spread of Buddhism to the world was closely related to the spread of Buddhism in China. After Buddhism was introduced into the country, through the efforts of Tibetan Buddhism and the original Buddhism, Buddhism had risen to a height that others could not reach, be it in theory or magic. Even India, the birthplace of Buddhism, could only look at its back and sigh at its inferiority. However, for thousands of years, there were countless conflicts between religious forces and imperial forces. Buddhism had suffered several great disasters. Countless monks died or returned to secular life, which greatly weakened the power of the monks of Buddhism. However, after Buddhism entered Japan, it immediately flourished. Japanese were not good at creating, but they were extremely good at learning and using. Especially at that time, Buddhism was facing a disaster. Many eminent monks passed on the true methods to the monks who came to Japan to study abroad, such as Hongfa of Xinyan Tantrism, Xinluan of Pure Land True sect, and Zhuoqing of Tiantai sect. These monks who had studied abroad eagerly learned the most advanced Dharma concepts and the most powerful Dharma spells of Hua Buddhism. They brought them back to Japan and carried forward the Dharma. Although Buddhism in Japan had also suffered many disasters for thousands of years, every time it suffered a disaster, the power of Buddhism in this country became stronger, and the monks under its command became more valiant. In particular, the movement of Pure Land True sect allowed the monks of this country to step onto the historical stage of national wars and military hegemony for the first time, and the monks were promoted to an unprecedented height. Although the monks of Japan also ate vegetarian and chanted Buddha's name, they had special, guardian monks, which were cruel and fierce monk soldiers. These monks had always been trained in the cruelest way of cultivation. The degree of cruelty was 100 times crueler than that of Buddhism or Indian ascetics. Their existence was not only protected by Buddhism, but also recognized by the government. Happy face, although these monks, who chanted Amitabha and carried killing knives in their hands, had killed countless people, they firmly believed that what they did was for the prosperity of Buddhism and preaching. Therefore, they believed that at the moment of their death, they could put down the butcher's knife and become Buddha immediately. Therefore, they never showed mercy. They were fierce to their enemies and also fierce to themselves. Although the cultivators of various sects in Hua country had heard of this point of view, except for the tragic war that concerned the fate of the two countries decades ago, when had there ever been such friction and battle in the Japanese cultivation world? Therefore, when the killing machine of Pure Land Truce sect began to show its ferocious face, they suddenly realized that Indian Buddhism, Chinese law, and Japanese monks were really not deceiving. No matter how powerful the law of a country was, it could only be used by powerful cultivators. However, could a group of cultivators like them, who had been born from their parents, be a match for such a killing machine? Originally, the cultivators on the field had been excited by Takahashi Shota's cruel means, but Takahashi Shota had injured himself in order to win. This kind of ferocity greatly shocked the cultivators of all sects on the field. They could not understand Takahashi Shota's winning means of killing 10,000 enemies and sacrificing 3,000 of his own. For a moment, everyone on the field stared at Zhang Kongyun. The Jingyi school represented the strongest force in the cultivation world of the Hua Taoist family, and Zhang Kongyun was the strongest cultivator of the Jingyi school at this time. If he lost, the consequences would be unimaginable. The Japanese cultivation world was also well aware of this. Although they were annoyed that Takahashi Shota had acted rudely without any discussion, which was the fine style of the Japanese military government during World War II, the matter had already been resolved. After all, they belonged to the same camp and the same country. At the moment, the two sides were enemies, so there was absolutely no reason for them to scold their own people and curry favor with the other side. Even if they wanted to uphold justice, they did not dare to stand up and say a word, because at this time, whoever dared to speak up for the cultivation world of China would definitely become a sinner in the Japanese cultivation world. They would either be destroyed immediately or disappear in the long river of history with their sections. At this time, when they saw Zhang Kongyun appear, they couldn't help but become nervous. Many people spoke loudly to Takahashi Shota in Japanese, constantly giving him advice and telling him how to deal with it. Takahashi Shota also restrained the arrogance on his face and carefully looked at the opponent in front of him. Similarly, there were also many cultivators from the cultivation sects in China who were loudly giving advice to Zhang Kongyun. For a moment, two languages were mixed in the field. You said yours, I said mine, and it was extremely intense. Ruan Hongling grabbed Zi Yuan's arm nervously and whispered, Shiji, can Jinren Zhang Kongyun win? Although the two sides had been fighting and killing each other before, at this time, they were facing a common enemy, so she couldn't help but be nervous. Zi Yuan said in a low voice, I don't know. If Jinren Zhang is determined to fight to the death, he has a great chance of winning, but if... Before she could finish her words, she saw Zhang Kongyun suddenly shout. His body moved and he rushed toward Takahashi Shota like a cannonball. Seeing that he was going to fight hand to hand, everyone exclaimed. Some even stamped their feet and said, damn it, don't fight hand to hand. When Takahashi Shota saw him approaching, he was overjoyed. With a grim smile, he slashed down with his knife. However, as soon as his knife hit Zhang Kongyun's body, Zhang Kongyun in front of him was instantly shattered, and he himself appeared behind Takahashi Shota in the blink of an eye. In an instant, a sword appeared in his hand and stabbed toward Takahashi Shota's back. Although Takahashi Shota also had a jinshin to protect himself, his opponent also had a jinshin. Under the two offset, he didn't dare to rely on the jinshin to resist it. He shouted loudly, turned around, and slashed. This slash had the power of the returning horse saber. It was ferocious, and the angle was tricky. If Zhang Kongyun did not retract his sword, this slash would definitely hit him as well. Takahashi Shota thought that Zhang Kongyun would save himself first and then try to hurt the enemy. However, as soon as he slashed out with his knife, Zhang Kongyun disappeared again. There was only a sword left in front of him, still stabbing toward him as fast as lightning. Takahashi Shota was taken aback. He suddenly felt a powerful force approaching from above his head. When he knocked away the long sword in front of him with his saber, He looked up and saw a bolt of lightning falling from the top of his head in an instant. It went straight to the top of his head. With a bang, Takahashi Shota's body immediately trembled. Although he had a jinshin to protect himself, this lightning bolt almost broke his jinshin. Takahashi Shota was shocked and angry. Just as he was about to fight back, he saw Zhang Kongyun appear in front of him again. There was a talisman on his fingertips, and he stuck it to his forehead. Takahashi Shota shouted angrily and slashed with his knife. However, Zhang Kongyun disappeared again like a ghost, and a talisman flew lightly in front of him. The talisman on it quickly turned red and bright, and then it exploded with a bang. Gravel flew everywhere, and smoke filled the air. Takahashi Shota's body was shrouded in it, and he couldn't see it at all. The fight between the two of them seemed to take a long time, but in fact, it only took a few seconds. The cultivators on both sides saw that Zhang Kongyun seemed to have transformed into several people at the same time, casting spells at the same time. He attacked Takahashi Shota from all directions, catching him off guard and making him unable to fight back. Ziyuan stared at Zhang Kongyun without blinking. Ziyuan stared at Zhang Kongyun intently. In her heart, she had a vague understanding of the mystery of jinshin fighting methods that Li Yunyang had once mentioned. She saw that although Zhang Kongyun was old, he was worthy of being a veteran who had cultivated for decades. All kinds of magic came out one after another. Zhang Kongyun almost didn't cast any magic or chant any incantations. It was as if everything in the world was a part of his body, and he could command it as if it was his arm. In just a short while, Zhang Kongyun had surrounded Takahashi Shota and used dozens of Taoist magic. Takahashi Shota was like a beast with brute force but trapped by an invisible big net. He roared angrily, but he couldn't catch Zhang Kongyun's real body. Although Zhang Kongyun's magic couldn't break Takahashi Shota's jinshin, when the lightning summoned by Zhang Kongyun hit him, it would still cause the qi and blood in his body to fluctuate. The fire magic exploded in front of him, causing dust to fly everywhere and greatly affecting his vision. In particular, Zhang Kongyun would release a few earth magic from time to time, making Takahashi Shota worry about what would happen under his feet. Although this couldn't cause direct harm to Takahashi Shota, every time he wanted to step on the ground would sink, causing him to step on nothing. This kind of psychological blow and turmoil was really indescribable. Takahashi Shota was originally violent and impatient. At this time, he was surrounded and beaten by Zhang Kongyun, so he roared again and again. When the cultivators of the various sects in China saw that Zhang Kongyun had the upper hand, they immediately cheered and cheered. However, the cultivators of the various sects in Japan fell into a dead silence for a while. Ruan Hongling watched as Takahashi Shota was surrounded by Zhang Kongyun. Zhang Kongyun hit him with his left palm and his right sword. In a short while, Takahashi Shota was covered in wounds and bleeding. She pulled Ziyuan's arm in surprise and whispered, "Shiji, are we going to win?" Ziyuan nodded slightly and said, "Jinren Zhang's method is right. The Japanese monks are indeed very strong, but their magic is single and can't be compared with ours." He besieged the other party with all kinds of powerful magic, cutting his flesh with a blunt knife, slowly letting him bleed, and then exhausting him to death. This is the best strategy. While she was speaking, she saw one of Zhang Kongyun's doppelgangers being smashed by Takahashi Shota's knife. However, the doppelganger's long sword pierced Takahashi Shota's chest with a puff, and the tip of the sword went straight through his back. The cultivators of the various sects in China all cheered. Ruan Hongling even shouted with ecstasy, "We won." Chapter 700. At this moment, Zhang Kongyun saw that his long sword had pierced through his opponent's body. He immediately leaned forward, turned his hand, and slapped Takahashi Shota's forehead. In his opinion, this sword must have pierced the opponent's lungs. Once the 5 internal organs were damaged, the 5 elements in the cultivator's body would collapse. Once the 5 elements collapsed, the small universe would also be fragmented, and the essence, qi, and blood would no longer be able to flow smoothly to the 3 dansins. Naturally, the cultivator would use Shinchi. Without Shinchi, the Jinshin would not be far from being broken. Zhang Kongyun saw that his opponent's golden body was about to be broken, and it was time for him to beat the drowning dog. He immediately revealed his true body and slashed at him with an incomparably powerful heaven-flipping palm. The power of the doppelganger and the power of magic were naturally not as powerful as the attack of his real body. Zhang Kongyun was confident that he would win, so he made a prompt decision to kill. However, he never expected that a killing machine like Takahashi Shota had already known his body like the back of his hand. At the moment when Zhang Kongyun's sword pierced his body, he avoided the vital parts of his lungs. The long sword went straight through the middle of his lungs. This sword seemed fierce, but in fact, it did not hurt the 5 internal organs. Takahashi Shota didn't even look at the sword in his chest. He grinned grimly, and instead of retreating, he suddenly rushed toward Zhang Kongyun. The Zen knife in his hand moved from bottom to top, and he used the reverse kasaya of the ancient Japanese martial arts. This strike was hidden and sinister. It was a unique skill in Japanese kendo. If it hit the target, even if the target was not cut in half, the vital parts of the target would not be safe. Especially at this time, he was already very close to Zhang Kongyun. He didn't even look at Zhang Kongyun's palm. He only wanted to die with his opponent. At this time, everyone exclaimed. Zhang Kongyun's face changed in an instant. He gritted his teeth and thought to himself, "Damn it, I was too rash. I should have consumed him for a while." But at this time, it was too late for him to regret. The other party's Zen saber, which could destroy the golden body in the yang spirit, had already reached his knee. Although his palm had also slapped an inch in front of the other party's forehead, even if he could kill the other party's steel saber would not stop moving. If it was swung up, he was afraid that he would die without a doubt. Should he trade his life for hers, or retreat? Zhang Kongyun thought quickly. Just as he was hesitating, he suddenly heard Zhang Lufang and Hardadef's exclamations. They shouted at the same time, "Master!" At this moment, a thought flashed through Zhang Kongyun's mind. If I die, what about my disciple? Who will pass down my life's cultivation? Who will inherit my mantle? The most important thing for Chinese cultivators was the inheritance of techniques. Zhang Kongyun had been cultivating for decades and had long been qualified to set up his own sect. For a cultivator like him, there was nothing more important than the inheritance of techniques. That was why he finally accepted a foreign disciple like Hardadef. But for Takahashi Shota, death was a kind of liberation for him. Once he died, it would be the time to lay down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha on the spot. Therefore, the monk soldiers of the Imperial Shadow Hall of the Pure Land sect had never been afraid of death. Comparing the two, the situation was instantly reversed. Zhang Kongyun made a decision in an instant. His decision was determined by the thinking of the Chinese cultivation world for 2,000 years. The Dharma of China could never be broken. As for the Japanese monk, if one died, more people would stand up. Exchanging one's 10,000-year body for a vicious monk like the other party was like throwing jade against rubble. It was not worth it at all. Zhang Kongyun retreated in an instant, and his figure disappeared in an instant. On the other hand, Takahashi Shota seemed to have expected this move. With a loud roar, although his reverse kasaya missed, he immediately followed up with a kasaya slash. The fierce blade aura slashed on Zhang Kongyun's body, which appeared not far away again. Zhang Kongyun roared. It was too late for him to dodge. Although he thought about it and his long sword appeared in front of him in an instant to block the attack, the momentum of the saber gang blasted him away like a cannonball. A bloody mark immediately appeared from his forehead to his chest, and then blood gushed out. Zhang Kongyun fell to the side of the field. The disciples of the Zhengyi school were all shocked. Zhang Ling rushed over to Zhang Kongyun and quickly helped him stop the bleeding and take medicine. Zhang Lufang rushed over and cried, "Master, don't scare me." Zhang Ling checked Zhang Kongyun's pulse and said in a deep voice, "He's fine. It's just a flesh wound." His internal organs have been shaken, and his chi and blood are a little chaotic. He'll be fine after a while. The cultivators of all sects on the field felt a chill in their hearts. As soon as Zhang Kongyun of the Jingyi school was defeated, everyone's courage was shaken. For a moment, no one dared to step forward. At this moment, the situation was reversed. The cheers of the cultivators of all sects stopped abruptly, and everyone fell into silence. Zhang Kongyun had also been defeated. No one from the Jingyi school could make a move anymore. Next, who could stop this Japanese? China's long-standing Dharma was so vulnerable in the face of a Japanese monk who was not afraid of death. Takahashi Shoda suddenly pulled out the long sword from his chest. Blood was flowing from his chest, but he didn't even look at it. He just took out a medicine bottle from his sleeve, poured some powder on his wound, and then wiped it a few times. Then, he smiled ferociously and said, "Who's next?" Although most of the Chinese cultivators on the field didn't understand what he was saying, they could guess what he meant when they saw the expression and movements of the evil monk. For a moment, there was a dead silence, and no one answered. Takahashi Shoda shouted loudly on the field again. Zi Yuan, who was on the side of the field, frowned. She took a deep breath and took a step forward. Just as she was about to speak, Wan Hongling grabbed her and said in a trembling voice, "Shiji, can you win?" Zi Yuan turned her face and said in a determined voice, "Even if I can't win, I must not let him continue to be arrogant." Wan Hongling's heart trembled when she heard this. She knew that Zi Yuan was going to fight with the determination to die. She opened her mouth and wanted to dissuade her, but she didn't know what to say. She could only watch Zi Yuan walk up step by step. However, as soon as Zi Yuan took a few steps, she heard a loud voice shouting, "Sister Zi Yuan." Zi Yuan turned her head and saw two flashes of blue light. Two figures appeared in front of her in the blink of an eye. It was Su Chan and Zhou Qin. Zi Yuan was suddenly shocked. "Why are you here?" Su Chan's eyes widened as she looked at the bloody Taoist field. Before she could greet her, she said in horror, "What happened? Why is it so tragic?" Wan Hongling, who was standing to one side, quickly explained the situation in front of her. When Zhou Qin saw that most of the people who had fallen in the field were from the Chinese cultivation world, her eyes suddenly turned red. She glared at Takahashi Shoda and said coldly, "Did he do it?" Zi Yuan saw that she was clenching her fists and was eager to have a try. She quickly said, "Zhou Qin, Zhang Huashui and Zhang Kongyun were both defeated by him. Don't go. Let me go." Zhou Qin suddenly turned her head and said firmly, "No, Zi Yuan, I know that your cultivation is higher than mine and you are better than me in a fight. But the Japanese in front of me is already covered in scars. Can't I take down such a seriously injured beast?" However, Zi Yuan shook her head and said, "An injured beast is the most terrible. As the saying goes, a trapped beast will still fight. Although your fighting momentum is amazing and incomparably fierce, if you encounter the monk soldiers of the Imperial Shadow Hall, I'm afraid." Before she could finish her words, Zhou Qin said flatly, "That's why I should go. Do you think that Takahashi Shoda is the only one in the Japanese cultivation world? After he falls down, who else will fight? Zi Yuan, you stay to deal with the masters behind you. Leave this guy to me." Zi Yuan opened her mouth and wanted to object, but when she glanced at the cultivators of various sects in the Japanese cultivation world not far away, her heart suddenly sank. She knew that Takahashi Shoda was not the most powerful among these people. Once she was defeated, almost all the Jinshin masters on the field would be wiped out. Zi Yuan swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth and said with concern, "Be careful. This monk is not afraid of death, and his knife is very powerful. It specializes in breaking the Jinshin. If the Yang spirit touches it, it will be broken. It's very terrible. Try to use your Vulcan's whip and Chiwa to consume him until he dies. Don't give him a chance to get close to you. Fight around him and don't give him a chance to die together with you." Zhou Qin tidied up the corner of her clothes and stared at Takahashi Shota. She nodded and said, "I know." After that, she quickly went on the field. Su Chan looked at her worriedly and murmured in a low voice, "If only Yundong were here now." "Sister Zhou Qin, you must be fine." At this time, when the crowd saw Zhou Qin enter the arena, there was a commotion and a lot of discussion. Although Zhou Qin had become famous in the Taoist assembly, many people had only heard of her name and had never seen her. Now that they saw her, although their hearts were lifted, they were more suspicious and worried. Could such a beautiful girl, who looked like a lady from a noble family, defeat this fierce monk? A big question mark appeared in everyone's mind. Takahashi Shota laughed wildly. He had won in a row. Although he was injured, his momentum and murderous aura had climbed to a peak. At this time, the murderous aura all over his body seemed to be substantial, like a black mist lingering around him. The blood-stained Zen knife in his hand was emitting bursts of golden light, and the Amitabha on it was faintly discernible, as if it would fly out of the knife in the next second. Takahashi Shota laughed wildly and said, "Is there no one else in the cultivation world in China?" As he said this, he pointed the Zen knife in his hand at Zhou Qin. "Even a little girl has gone up." When Zhou Qin saw him pointing the tip of the knife at her, a monstrous murderous aura rushed over, making the hair on her back stand on end. Her heart felt as if it had been squeezed by someone's hand. She subconsciously wanted to turn around and run. Zhou Qin reacted very quickly and forcibly stopped this idea. She took a deep breath and gritted her teeth. The qi and blood in her body surged, and slowly, the courage in her body recovered. Just as she was about to speak, she heard a voice coming from the air. "Zhou Qin, step back. Let me do it." When Zhou Qin heard this voice, her body trembled violently. She suddenly opened her eyes wide and looked into the air. She saw a figure land on the field. He was tall and handsome. Who else could it be but Li Yundong? Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Wan Hongling were overjoyed and exclaimed in unison. The cultivators of various sects in China who knew Li Yundong were also shocked. Some people who didn't know Li Yundong quickly asked the people next to them, "Who is this person?" At this time, the cultivators of various sects who knew Li Yundong had completely abandoned their sections. Their eyes flashed and they said excitedly, "This is Invincible Li." "Ah. This is Invincible Li? So young?" The crowd was stirred, and at this time, Mao Yuchang, who was in a coma, also woke up. She stared at Li Yundong on the field and thought to herself, "This Invincible Li. Is he really invincible?" Although the purpose of the cultivators of various sects in Japan was to meet Li Yundong, they had found that Li Yundong had not come before and thought that he would not appear again. But at this time, Li Yundong's sudden appearance immediately caused a commotion. The man who had defeated Masako Tachibana and ended the 10-year history of Xinyan Tantrism dominating the cultivation world had once again appeared in front of them. Last time, they had suffered a great humiliation. This time, could they get back such a humiliation? Today's 2 nights are over. In addition, 17 groups of 1610904955 Fox dens are open. Chapter 701. The cultivators of all sects in Japan looked at the young and handsome man in front of them with complicated eyes. Ise Shinguang put his hands on his chest and laughed. He really came. He finally came. Ise Chun's eyes, which had been drooping, also raised at this time. She stared at Li Yundong with bright eyes, and a meaningful smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Finally, it's getting interesting. Ise Shinguang said to Saionji Tsunekatsu in a low voice, "Go and call Takahashi Shota down. He can't fight anymore. In his current state, if he fights with Li Yundong, he will definitely lose." Saionji Tsunekatsu was stunned for a moment. He glanced at Ise Shinguang and then shouted to Takahashi Shota, "Takahashi, how about you come down and have a rest for a while?" Although Takahashi Shota didn't know Li Yundong, he clearly heard the whispers of the cultivators of all sects in Japan. His eyes flashed with a strange fanatical light, and he thought to himself, is this the famous Li Wudi of China? Well, if I kill him, I will be the most famous person in the Japanese cultivation world. Takahashi Shota didn't seem to hear Saionji Tsunekatsu's voice. He smiled grimly, picked up the Zen knife in his hand, pointed at Li Yundong, and shouted, "You are Li Yundong? Well, come up and die." Takahashi Shota was furious. He raised his knife and slashed at Li Yundong's back. This knife was extremely fierce, and in an instant, a deep ditch was cut on the ground. The people on the sidelines suddenly cried out in alarm. Shameless! Be careful! Despicable man, how dare you sneak attack! Li Yundong seemed to have eyes on his back. His hands quickly pinched a 9th-level rebirth seal, turned around, and slapped his head. Boom! Takahashi Shota's blade aura struck the glittering rank 9 rebirth seal and suddenly shattered. However, the rank 9 rebirth seal didn't stop. It was like a huge golden palm that rushed towards Takahashi Shota. Takahashi Shota was shocked. He leaped and narrowly dodged the palm. But even so, his Zen blade was brushed by the golden palm, and half of his arm went numb. Takahashi Shota was horrified. He knew that his Zen saber was specialized in breaking the body protection jinshin of all sections. Once the saber gang was used, it could break everything. However, after fighting with Li Yunyang's Mahamudra, Li Yunyang didn't move at all, while his saber gang was like a piece of paper. What was going on? If he hadn't dodged in time, he would have been slapped so hard that he wouldn't even be able to see his body. Takahashi Shota had won all the battles in a row, so he had naturally become arrogant and underestimated his enemy. At this time, he saw Li Yunyang throw a palm strike, glanced at him indifferently, and then turned around, as if he didn't take him seriously. Takahashi Shota was shocked and angry, but he didn't dare to attack again for a while. At this time, Saionji Tsunekatsu shouted, "Takahashi, come down. You are no match for him." Shota Takahashi didn't wait for him to finish. He turned his head and shouted with a ferocious face, "Shut up. I will definitely defeat him." After that, he gently wiped the blood on the Zen saber with his fingers. Then, he took out 2 talismans from his bosom with his blood-stained fingers, pasted one on the Shan acupoint on his chest and the other on the Shinting acupoint on his forehead. He began to recite the incantation quickly. Li Yunyang didn't even look at him. Instead, he turned around and smiled at Zhou Qin, who was beside him. "Aren't you supposed to protect me? Why are you all here?" Zhou Qin looked at Li Yunyang in surprise. Although the situation in front of her was critical and dangerous, her heart was calm. It seemed that as long as the man in front of her was there, even if the sky fell down, he would be able to hold it up with one arm. Zhou Qin pursed her lips and said with a slight smile, "Didn't we leave a note?" Li Yunyang smiled and said, "I know, but there are only a few words on your note, and they are written like crazy cursive. How can I know what's going on?" At this time, Su Chan also rushed over. She put her arms around Li Yunyang's arm as if there was no one else around and said intimately, "Yundong, why did you come so quickly? We've just arrived, and you're already here." Li Yunyang patted her gently on the arm and said softly, "I was worried about you. When I woke up, I found that there was no one in the room. Oh my god, it really scared me." Su Chan said in surprise, "No way. We're a 5th Shirbua and 6th Shirbua. We didn't leave until they came." Li Yunyang was stunned. "Lu Yuehong and Zhuang Yiting are here too?" "I didn't see them." Su Chan and Zhou Qin looked at each other. Zhou Qin said, "Master, they did come. If they hadn't said that they would protect you, we wouldn't have dared to leave at all." Li Yunyang was secretly surprised. He thought for a while and said in a low voice, "Maybe something happened to them. Forget it, let's not worry about it now. Where's Ziyuan? Is she okay?" Su Chan raised her hand and said to Ziyuan, who had been outside the field, "Sister Ziyuan is fine. She's over there." Li Yundong looked in the direction of Su Chan's finger and saw that Zi Yuan was standing on the sidelines, staring at him. He and Zi Yuan looked at each other and smiled at the same time. Although they didn't say a word to each other, there was a tacit understanding between them. Seeing that the other was safe and sound, they both put down their worries. Li Yundong nodded slightly to Zi Yuan and asked Zhou Qin, "What's going on here? Why is there blood everywhere?" Su Chan was quick to talk and rushed to tell him what had happened here. When Li Yundong heard that the Japanese had suddenly come here, he laughed and said, "It turns out that they are here to get revenge." Li Yundong glanced at the cultivators of the Japanese sects and saw that there were many masters there. The masters of all sects were staring at him angrily. With so many masters staring at him at the same time, the power was indescribable. If it had been anyone else, they would have been crushed by the pressure of this gaze. However, Li Yundong just smiled coldly. When his eyes swept over Saionji Tsunekatsu, he was surprised and his eyes burst out with a flash of light. Li Yundong stared at Saionji Tsunekatsu, patted Zhou Qin and Su Chan on the shoulder, and said, "Let's go down first. You don't have to fight." When the three of them walked to the side of the field, Zhou Qin rushed to say, "Master, let me fight this battle. Don't tell me I can't even defeat an injured monk?" Li Yundong looked back and saw that at this time, the two talismans on Takahashi Shota's chest and forehead were constantly emitting bursts of golden light. These lights lingered in front of him, making him look as if he was plated with a layer of gold powder. His originally ferocious and terrible murderous aura also became solemn and dignified. Li Yundong narrowed his eyes slightly and said in a low voice, "Just now, you said that each sect can only send one person. Of course, it should be me. It can be said that all this happened because of me, so naturally I should bear the responsibility." Zhou Qin opened her mouth and wanted to say something, but she saw that Takahashi Shota's momentum was strong at this time. His whole body was like a golden Buddha, which was daunting. She also knew that if she won, it would be easy. If she lost, then Li Yundong could only watch. If she forced herself to fight, it would definitely cause a big fight between the two sections. Obviously, there were many masters in the Japanese cultivation world. Once they fought together, it was very likely that they would be defeated. Thinking of this, Zhou Qin swallowed her words and said with concern, "Master, you have to be careful." At this time, Zi Yuan also said in a low voice, "Li Yundong, be careful. This is the monk soldier of the Imperial Shadow Hall of the Pure Land sect. He is very fierce." Zhang Kongyun and Zhang Huashui were both defeated by him. Li Yundong's heart trembled slightly. Ruan Hongling, who was beside him, gritted her teeth and said, "This evil monk is vicious. He has already killed 2 cultivators of our Hua Taoist family, and he didn't even let go of the Yang spirit. Li Yundong, don't show any mercy." When Li Yundong heard this, he was furious. Only then did he understand what was going on with the blood on the ground. But although he was extremely angry in his heart, his face was still indifferent, and no one could see any clues. He nodded to Zi Yuan and Ruan Hongling and said, "Don't worry. I'm here. Nothing will happen." After that, he stepped onto the field. Everyone saw that as soon as he appeared, he immediately suppressed Takahashi Shota's arrogance, especially Li Yundong's arrogant behavior, which made them whisper to each other and talk about it. "It's really invincible Li. He doesn't take these Japanese people seriously at all. Alas, I hope he doesn't underestimate the enemy. In my opinion, he's bluffing." "Bah, what bluffing? Do you think anyone can be called invincible?" Be quiet, be quiet. Let's see how he deals with Takahashi Shota. In a while, we'll know whether he's really invincible or not." Everyone's eyes turned to Li Yundong, only to see this overly young man standing in the field. His feet were neither ding nor ba, and his expression was calm. There was no sign that he was about to fight fiercely at all. At this time, Takahashi Shota's momentum had reached its peak. The wound on his chest, which had been pierced, was quickly growing granulation, and the wound was stitched up. He raised his head, opened his eyes, and shouted loudly. Suddenly, the ground under his feet sank, and countless cracks appeared on the hard bluestone, spreading in all directions. Li Yundong looked at him indifferently and gently pinched his fingers in front of him. Everyone saw his 10 fingers flying, as if Buddha was pinching a flower or Sakyamuni was pinching a flower. He was calm and had no power at all. At this moment, everyone felt as if a real Buddha had appeared on the field. Although Li Yundong's momentum was far inferior to Takahashi Shota's, he had a great pressure from head to toe, as if he had become one with heaven and earth and returned to the same origin with all methods. As soon as an expert made a move, it would be obvious whether he was real or not. The cultivators of various sects had high and low cultivation quotients. Those with low cultivation quotients like Zhang Lufang, Deng Yu, Deng Jiao, and others didn't dare to breathe, and their eyes were fixed on him. Those with high cultivation quotients like Mao Yuchang, Su Yangzi, and others exclaimed in unison, "Unity of heaven and man, Buddhism and Taoism." Although it was just a movement, although it was just a finger gesture, the cultivators of all sects in Japan were shocked by Li Yundong's realm of unity of heaven and man. They knew that although Takahashi Shota was fierce, and at this time he was like a Vajra or an Arhat descending to the world, no matter how fierce and terrifying a monk was, in front of the supreme great way of the world, in front of the supreme sect of heaven and earth, how could he have any chance of winning? Ise Xinguang looked shocked. He murmured, "He has become stronger again. This posture. He has already comprehended the great way of truth. Izumo. This is a genius who is even more outstanding than you." Ise Chuyun didn't say a word. He stared at Li Yundong with fanatical and excited eyes. Saionji Tsunekatsu, who was standing to one side, suddenly shouted, "Takahashi, you have fought many battles in a row. Why don't you come down and rest for a while?" Takahashi Shota didn't understand. How could he know what he was talking about? Saionji Tsunekatsu's words were said to Li Yundong. The subtext was, "Li Yundong, even if you win, you will only take advantage of the exhaustion of the opponent after a winning streak. It's no big deal." Li Yundong naturally understood his trick. He glanced at Saionji Tsunekatsu, and a sarcastic smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He said lightly, "Saionji Tsunekatsu, I didn't expect to meet you again. Don't worry, I won't take advantage of you. You tell him that I will stand here and let him cut me 3 times. I will never dodge." Saionji Tsunekatsu was both surprised and happy. He was surprised that Li Yundong dared to say such arrogant words and let Takahashi Shota cut him 3 times. Saionji Tsunekatsu was happy that the knife in Takahashi Shota's hand was the Amitabha righteous knife, which had been handed down for 500 years in the Imperial Shadow Hall. It was an extremely powerful Buddhist protective magic weapon. This knife had drunk blood for 500 years, and its murderous aura was extremely strong. Even on their side, no one dared to take a knife head-on, let alone 3. When the cultivators of the various sects in China heard this, they were all shocked and shouted, "Li Yundong, are you crazy? Why did you let him cut you 3 times? Why are you being polite to these little Japanese? Go on, kill him. Li Yundong, don't underestimate the enemy. Humph, Li Wudi is so arrogant. This knife is specialized in breaking the golden body. I want to see how he can take these 3 knives." Zhou Qin, Su Chan, Wan Hongling, and the others were also ready to admonish him anxiously, but Zi Yuan stopped them and said in a low voice, "Li Yundong has already comprehended the true methods of Buddhism and Taoism. Don't worry. Since he dares to boast, he will be fine." After listening to Saionji Tsunekatsu's translation, Takahashi Shota couldn't help laughing wildly. He pointed the Zen knife in his hand at Li Yundong and shouted angrily, "You're courting death." His originally serious face suddenly became extremely ferocious, like a Vajra glaring and an Arhat going berserk. His eyes widened like copper bells, and his eyes cracked. He stomped on the ground with both feet, and his body soared into the air like a cannonball in an instant. Everyone couldn't help looking up and saw that Takahashi Shota's figure in the sky had turned into a very small black spot, Then the black spot fell from the sky and kept growing bigger. He was fierce, and the airflow around him was boiling with flames because of the friction. He was like an angry Vajra descending from the raging sea, and he cut toward Li Yundong with a knife from above. Chapter 702. Everyone saw that the power of this knife was overwhelming and unstoppable. It was as if even a mountain in front of them would be split by Takahashi Shota's knife. Even a top master like Zhang Tongtian, the leader of the Qingqing sect, was horrified. Takahashi Shota grinned hideously. He saw Li Yundong getting closer and closer in his sight. With this knife, he would definitely split this arrogant guy into two pieces. Once he defeated this guy, he would become the most famous person in the Japanese cultivation world. As soon as this thought flashed through Takahashi Shota's mind, the Zen knife in his hand slashed nearly 10 meters away from Li Yundong with a bang. It was as if it had hit an invisible hard object. A majestic force bounced back and sent Takahashi Shota flying. Takahashi Shota roared wildly. Half of his body was numb from the shock, and the hand holding the knife was torn. He looked at Li Yundong in shock and anger, only to see a giant Buddha about 10 meters high hovering in front of Li Yundong. This giant Buddha was faintly discernible, both of its hands forming the immovable fundamental seal. Although the 10-meter-tall giant Buddha was like a grain of sand in the ocean when compared to a majestic mountain like Mount Longhu, it was not tall at all. However, on this side peak of Mount Longhu, this giant Buddha exuded an awe-inspiring aura. It was as immovable as a mountain, looking down on all other mountains. Takahashi Shota looked at Li Yundong and the giant Buddha in front of him in shock. He knew that this giant Buddha was formed by Li Yundong's yang spirit, but he couldn't understand why Li Yundong's yang spirit was not broken after this knife attack. Takahashi Shota subconsciously took a step back, but as soon as he did so, he immediately became alert. He gritted his teeth, and the qi and blood in his body boiled to the extreme. With a loud shout, he rushed toward Li Yundong crazily again. Although he did not borrow the momentum of falling from the sky, the power of this strike was much stronger than before. The steel saber in his hand shone with a golden light, and the Buddha statue on the saber seemed to have come to life, glaring angrily at him. With a boom, the Amitabha righteous saber once again hit Li Yundong's yang spirit. But in an instant, Takahashi Shota once again felt a majestic and powerful force coming back. It seemed that the greater his strength, the greater the force of the rebound. Takahashi Shota's body seemed to be hit by an invisible giant hammer, and he flew back fiercely. As soon as he landed on the ground, the bluestone under his feet shattered. The gravel rolled up, and the ground was plowed by him. But even so, his momentum did not stop, and he retreated like a cannonball. Takahashi Shota roared. He stabbed the Zen blade in his hand into the ground and retreated more than 10 meters before he stopped. Takahashi Shota was half kneeling on the ground, trembling all over. His hand that was holding the Zen knife was dripping with blood. The blood flowing from the crack between his thumb and index finger flowed along the handle of the knife and then flowed to the ground. Takahashi Shota looked up at Li Yundong incredulously, only to see that the yang spirit in front of Li Yundong had not dissipated. Instead, it had grown a little stronger, as if his knife had added some strength to the other party. This is impossible. Takahashi Shota fell to the ground and looked at Li Yundong in horror. He shouted, "Who the hell are you? This is impossible." The cultivators of all sects in China saw that Li Yundong had not made a move. Takahashi Shota, who had been showing off his strength before, was already so shocked that his soul was almost broken. They immediately burst into thunderous cheers and applause. Wei Qing was so excited that her pretty face turned red, and her jade-like hands were almost broken. She shouted excitedly, "Super Li, you are really invincible. Good job." Deng Yu and Deng Jiao were so excited that they almost jumped up and down, shouting non-stop. However, at this time, everyone outside the arena was focused on the arena, and their voices were drowned out by the clamor of the crowd, so no one paid attention to them. Not only them, but even an experienced and prudent cultivator like Su Yangzi also nodded slightly and said with admiration, "He is really powerful. He deserves his reputation." Mao Yuchang secretly admired him in her heart, but she was still unconvinced and said, "He is hypocritical. He could have killed the other party at once, but he chose to let the other party make 3 cuts. If the other party doesn't make the 3rd cut, what will he do?" As soon as she finished speaking, Takahashi Shoda suddenly let out a beast-like roar. He spat a mouthful of blood on the Zen blade in his hand. The Zen blade drank Takahashi Shoda's blood, and suddenly, the Umitba on the blade turned into a terrible bright red. A red light quickly rushed into Takahashi Shoda's body. The blood and hostility that the Umitba righteous saber had accumulated over the past 500 years poured out at this moment. Everyone was shocked, and Su Yangzi even turned his head and looked at Mao Yuchang strangely. Although he didn't say anything, his eyes seemed to say, "Do you think Takahashi Shoda won't make the 3rd cut?" "You're wrong." Mao Yuchang blushed, straightened her neck, and said irrationally, "Do you think he can defeat the other party by letting the other party make 3 cuts?" Su Yangzi didn't say anything and looked straight at the field. Everyone saw that Takahashi Shoda's body was shrouded by a strange red light. Takahashi Shoda's bones crackled like firecrackers. He suddenly stood up and walked toward Li Yunyang step by step. With every step he took, a deep footprint was left in the ground. Although he was moving slowly, with every step he took, everyone could feel that his strength had increased by a fraction, and his stature had also grown by a fraction. At this time, Takahashi Shoda's muscles were bulging, as if they were made of steel, and the blood vessels wrapped around his muscles were bulging like steel bars. His eyes bulged angrily, as if they were about to fall out of their sockets. The strong murderous intent in his eyes would make anyone who looked at them feel scared. Takahashi Shoda walked up to Li Yunyang with heavy steps. He held the Zen blade with both hands, raised it high, and let out a hysterical roar. "Go to hell." With a swish, the Zen blade tore through the air and space in an instant and slashed at Li Yunyang's yang spirit with a loud bang. With a loud crack, everyone felt as if countless thunderbolts had cut through the sky at the same time, and countless bells were ringing in unison. Although they were cultivators and their physical bodies were extremely strong, the sound still pierced their eardrums and almost tore them apart. Those with weaker cultivation immediately covered their ears and looked at the field with their teeth bared. Everyone saw smoke and rubble flying everywhere. Takahashi Shoda and Li Yundong's figures were drowned in it. Li Yundong's tall and majestic Buddha statue and yang spirit also disappeared. Although the cultivators of the Japanese cultivation sects didn't like Takahashi Shoda's arrogance, they couldn't help cheering loudly when they saw Takahashi Shoda shatter Li Yunyang's yang spirit. Su Chan, Zhou Qin, and the others on the sidelines were so shocked that their faces turned pale. Their legs went soft, and they almost fell to the ground. They thought that Li Yunyang's yang spirit must have been smashed by the opponent, so they couldn't see his huge yang spirit. Once the yang spirit was broken, it meant that Li Yunyang's body would definitely be destroyed. The cultivators of all sects in China also turned pale with horror. Many cultivators stamped their feet and said anxiously, "Alas, Li Yunyang shouldn't have been so conceited. Now it's all over. What should we do?" Even Li Yunyang lost. "It's over, it's really over this time." Mao Yuchang saw that although Li Yunyang was unfortunately right, she was not happy at all. She gritted her teeth and struggled to stand up. "This idiot, I told you not to show off. Now it's all over. Shibwa, let me go again. Our Chinese cultivation world can't be helplessly." Before she could finish her words, Su Yangzi suddenly reached out to stop her and said, "Don't worry, look." Mao Yuchang looked over and saw that after the smoke on the field gradually dissipated, the figures of Li Yunyang and Takahashi Shoda slowly appeared. Li Yunyang was still standing in the same place. He stretched out a hand and pressed his fingers against the blade of the opponent's Zen blade, as if he had held the sharp Zen blade with one finger, making it impossible for him to take another step forward. As for Takahashi Shoda, he was covered in blood. He stood there like a statue, motionless. The Amitabha righteous saber in his hand stopped in front of Li Yunyang. There was a faint smile at the corner of Li Yunyang's mouth, full of sarcasm for the opponent's overestimation of his own ability. Everyone was shocked, and the cheers of the Japanese cultivators stopped abruptly. They were all stunned, like chickens and ducks that had been strangled by the throat. How is this possible? His young spirit has obviously been smashed. Many cultivators on the sidelines were so shocked that they murmured to themselves, unable to understand the scene in front of them. At this time, there were also some sharp-eyed people who saw at a glance that Li Yunyang's fingertips were faintly shining, as if there was a very small Buddha standing on them. Those with high comprehension immediately realized that Li Yundong had shrunk his yang spirit to the tip of his finger in an instant and blocked the ferocious attack of the opponent. Originally, when the yang spirit was extremely huge, it could block the opponent's fierce knife. At this time, it was condensed on the tip of his finger. Although its power had been reduced, its strength had doubled. This was one of the true methods of Buddhism's 8 great freedom heavens. It could be big or small. Takahashi Shoda stared at the Buddha, which was as small as a grain of sand, on Li Yunyang's fingertips. His whole body trembled uncontrollably. The Amitabha Buddha's righteous saber in his hand, which could cut mountains and stones, was also trembling with him. Cracks slowly appeared on the body of the saber. Then, with a clang, the Amitabha righteous saber was instantly shattered into countless pieces. Takahashi Shoda let out a miserable howl, and his body exploded with a bang, turning into a cloud of blood mist. Everyone's faces changed with horror. They knew that this was because Takahashi Shoda's terrifying power had been bounced back by Li Yunyang, and as a result, his body had been shattered alive. For a moment, there was a dead silence on the scene, and everyone looked at Li Yunyang in horror. Mao Yuchang's mouth was so wide open that her fist could almost be stuffed in. This guy had let the opponent cut him 3 times, but he had actually killed the opponent. What kind of Taoist magic was this? What kind of power was this? This kind of power was simply unheard of and unseen. Even Zi Yuan, Su Chan, Zhou Qin, and the others, who knew Li Yunyang the best, stared at him with their eyes wide open. They couldn't imagine how strong Li Yunyang had become after he woke up from meditation this time. Just as everyone was stunned, although Takahashi Shoda's body had exploded into a cloud of blood mist in an instant, his yang spirit appeared in an instant. At this time, he didn't have the ferocious murderous look on his face. Instead, he looked solemn and stood there with his palms together. He really had the posture of putting down the butcher's knife and becoming a Buddha immediately. Takahashi Shoda recited the scriptures, moved his body, and was about to fly in the direction of Japan. However, Li Yunyang snorted coldly. "You've cut me 3 times, and now you want to leave?" Seeing that Li Yunyang was unwilling to let go, the cultivators of the various sects in Japan couldn't help exclaiming loudly, "Li Yunyang, he has already become a Buddha. Let him go." Li Yunyang flew into a rage. Let him go? When he killed our Chinese cultivators here, did he ever let them go? After that, Li Yunyang shouted angrily, "Takahashi Shoda, you've killed so many people, and you want to become a Buddha? Obediently go to hell. Group 17 is full. Don't join it. Join Group 18, 731138755 ****. Chapter 703. After Li Yundong shouted angrily, the faces of the cultivators of various sects in Japan all changed, especially when they saw Li Yundong slap toward Takahashi Shoda's yang spirit. Suddenly, 2 figures rushed out of the crowd and rushed toward Li Yundong. "Stop!" Li Yundong snorted coldly, and the yang spirit at the tip of his finger instantly turned into a 3-headed and 6-armed wisdom king. 4 of its arms pinched 2 Mahamudra and slapped toward the 2 people who were rushing over from the left and right. The other 2 arms still pinched a Mahamudra and firmly slapped Takahashi Shoda's yang spirit. 9078, 8C3A4A6H5O7N8G67E9N8X0U2E30. 9C709M8. With a miserable cry, Takahashi Shota's young spirit was instantly torn apart and turned into countless avatars, frantically fleeing in all directions. This was the power of Jinshin. As long as it was not targeted by a specific powerful magical weapon, even if the young spirit was smashed, it could still turn into countless avatars and flee in all directions. Unfortunately, Li Yundong happened to have such a powerful magical weapon in his hand, the Burning Thumb Pot, which was specially designed to deal with the countless avatars of the young spirit escaping in all directions. Li Yundong quickly took out the Burning Thumb Pot and flicked his finger gently on the edge of the alms pot. With a ding, the Burning Thumb Pot immediately spread out a halo. The halo spread at an astonishing speed, and in an instant, it caught up with Takahashi Shota's avatars that were fleeing in all directions. Ever since Li Yundong had cultivated in the spirit space of the Burning Thumb Pot, he had the ability to be proficient in all Buddhist magical weapons. He was also the reincarnation of Wisdom King, and at this time, he had advanced to the realm of immortal Jinshin, so the power of the Burning Thumb Pot had doubled in his hands. If Takahashi Shota's son's spirit hadn't been destroyed, the Burning Thumb Pot might not have been able to keep him. But at this time, he was in a hurry to escape, so he turned the young spirit into thousands of avatars and fled in all directions. As long as one avatar escaped, he would be able to escape. But he had never expected that this would allow the Burning Thumb Pot to exert its power to the extreme. As soon as Takahashi Shota's avatar was touched by the rippling halo, it immediately froze in place, like a flying insect caught in a spider's web. Takahashi Masashi struggled crazily, but the more he struggled, the more he felt that the binding force was a bit stronger. Then, he flicked his finger again. With a crisp ding, the Burning Thumb Pot suddenly emitted a cyan halo, and it moved a little faster than before. Although the cultivators of the various sects had tempered their quintessential essence and inner cores to the point that they were as hard as steel, when the halo affected them, they still felt their chi and blood fluctuate. Their hearts trembled as though they were in the ocean, constantly being battered by ferocious waves. They couldn't help but be shocked. Their bodies were still intact, and their young spirits were still intact. What about Takahashi Shota, who had lost his body and countless young spirits? Takahashi Shota's countless avatars were shocked by the second cyan light and immediately lost the strength to struggle. An invisible huge spider web firmly bound him between heaven and earth. At this time, Li Yundong stretched out his hand to flick for the third time. At this time, the two people who had been blown away by Li Yundong's two Mahamudra couldn't help but exclaim in Chinese, "Li Yundong, you are so ruthless. Aren't you afraid of going to hell?" Li Yundong glanced at them and saw that they were both dressed like monks. One was wearing a red cassock, with a bald head and a square face. He was holding a string of Buddha beads and wearing wooden clogs. The other was wearing a yellow cassock, a bamboo hat, and a monk's staff. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing angrily. "Well said. Did you ever say such words when you were ruthless? You Japanese burned, killed, and looted in China decades ago, but when you went back, you became the gods worshipped in the Yasukuni shrine. Now, you've killed all the Chinese cultivators on Mount Longhu. Isn't that the same as trying to kill all of us? You have done this kind of thing, but in the end, you will become a Buddha, and I will go to hell for doing this kind of thing? What the F***ck is this?" Li Yundong's scolding only made the cultivators of the various sects in Japan look gloomy, while the cultivators of the various sects in China were proud and cheered loudly. Li Yunyang flicked the Burning Thumb Pot for the third time. With a ding sound, the third halo spread out in all directions. Takahashi Shota's young spirit doppelganger was instantly pulled back by the halo and all of them were collected into the Burning Thumb Pot. Everyone saw that after Takahashi Shota's young spirit doppelganger was pulled into the Burning Thumb Pot, his young spirit was like a small person trapped in the Burning Thumb Pot. He struggled desperately to escape, but there seemed to be an invisible cage around the Burning Thumb Pot, causing him to run into walls everywhere. When the two Japanese monks saw this scene, they couldn't help but feel anxious. They shouted, "Li Yundong, let him go. We can discuss everything else." Although Takahashi Shoda was violent and arrogant, his cultivation was recognized as the top in the Japanese cultivation world. Although there were many Imperial Shadow Hall monk soldiers, there were not many perfect killing machines like Takahashi Shoda. In order to cultivate him, the Pure Land True sect had spent a lot of money and material resources. Moreover, his status in the Imperial Shadow Hall of the Pure Land True sect was quite high. If he were to die in China, it would be a big blow to the Pure Land True sect and the Imperial Shadow Hall. Li Yundong sneered and held the burning thumb pot high in his hand so that everyone could see it clearly. He said loudly, "Since you have done this, don't blame us for doing it again. Takahashi Shoda killed 2 of us. I'm already letting him off easy by letting him use 1 life to pay for 2 of ours. If you are not afraid of death, just come up. I'll send you to accompany him." After that, he activated his Jinshi, and a blue flame suddenly appeared in the burning thumb pot. As soon as Takahashi Shoda's yang spirit was burned by the blue flame, he immediately let out an incomparably tragic wail. His countless yang spirit doppelgangers gathered together in an instant and madly hit the wall of the burning thumb pot. However, as soon as he hit it, the yang spirit was scattered and many doppelgangers were burned. Takahashi Shoda let out a miserable howl and immediately gathered together again, madly hitting it again. However, when the number of his yang spirit doppelgangers was intact, it was useless. At this time, it was like hitting a stone with an egg. Everyone saw Takahashi Shoda struggle for a while in the blue flame like a trapped beast. Slowly, the yang spirit was burned less and less, and gradually, it disappeared. It turned into a wisp of blue smoke, slowly drifting up from the top of the burning thumb pot, and finally dissipating in the air without a trace. For a moment, all the cultivators, whether from China or Japan, were silent. For cultivators, there was nothing more terrifying than the scene in front of them. Not only had the yang spirit been destroyed, but it had also been so cruelly refined and burned to death. It was really creepy. Although the cultivators of all sects in China hated Takahashi Shoda to the core, they were still shocked and speechless when they saw this scene. However, after watching Takahashi Shoda being refined, the red-robed monk and the yellow-robed monk sat down together. One put his palms together, and the other played with the Buddha beads. They began to recite the Sutra of Reincarnation. Zhang Lufeng watched for a while and whispered, "Why are you still reciting? His soul is gone. Can you send him to the afterlife?" All the cultivation sects in the world believed that people had souls after death, but they would go to different places. However, Takahashi Shoda's yang spirit had been destroyed, which meant that his soul no longer existed in the world. The Sutra of Reincarnation was probably playing the lute to a cow and throwing flirtatious glances at the blind. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao said in unison, "He deserves it. If such a person is allowed to be reincarnated, it would be unreasonable." Zhang Ling and the others also felt that it was the right thing to do, but because of their status, they could only think about it and not say it out loud. The 2 monks were reciting the scriptures on the field. Some of the frivolous and impetuous cultivators of all sects in China laughed and said, "Hey, is this Sutra of Reincarnation for you to hear? That's not right. Shouldn't your Pure Land sect be reciting the Sutra of Immeasurable Life? Why are you reciting it?" "Humph, I write a treatise and say a verse. I wish to see Amitabha Buddha and all living beings in the world. I wish to be reborn in a peaceful and happy country. The scriptures are nice to hear, but it's a pity that you're reciting scriptures in wolfskin. I don't know if Buddha will accept you or not." When the cultivators of all sects in Japan heard these harsh voices, they began to scold them one after another. For a time, after the fight, they began to scold each other again. The scolding went straight to the sky, and it was very lively. The 2 monks in red and yellow robes turned a deaf ear to this voice. After they finished reciting the scriptures, they stood up together and glared at Li Yundong. The red-robed monk shouted sternly, "Li Yundong, this matter is definitely not over. Our Pure Land sect will remember this humiliation. After that, he shouted at the Japanese cultivators, "Let's go." As soon as he finished speaking, 40 to 50 monks came out of the crowd and followed him down the mountain. At this time, there were only more than 200 people in the Japanese cultivation group. At this time, 40 to 50 people had left. Suddenly, the number of people was greatly reduced, and their momentum was greatly weakened. Saionji Tsunekatsu's face changed. He quickly stopped in front of them and began to speak Japanese with them. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao looked at them in confusion, as if they didn't understand why there were so many people in a sect. Deng Yu asked Zhang Lufang, "Is this Pure Land sect very powerful? Why do they have so many people?" Although Zhang Lufang was an inner disciple, she didn't know much about the cultivation sect of the neighbor in the east. She shook her head, but at this time, an old and hoarse voice came from the side. The Pure Land sect is an extremely powerful and huge sect in the Japanese cultivation world, especially the Pure Land sect. There are a total of 22 sects, among which there are 10 famous and powerful sections. When they heard this voice, they turned their heads and saw that Zhang Kongyun had already woken up and was talking with a pale face. Zhang Lufang was overjoyed. "Master, are you awake?" Zhang Ling, who was beside her, was also happy and asked with concern, "Shirdi, are you okay?" Zhang Kongyun forced a smile and said, "I'm fine. I won't die. It's just that I've lost all my face." Zhang Ling smiled and said, "It's good that you're fine. You can rest assured and recover." Zhang Lufang saw that Zhang Kongyun was depressed. It was obvious that he was still brooding over the defeat in the fight just now. She rolled her eyes and wanted to distract him, so she asked, "Master, you just said that there are 10 famous and powerful sects in the Pure Land sect. Which 10 are they?" Zhang Kongyun was indeed attracted by her topic. He coughed and said, "The most powerful one is the Pure Land sect's Hope Temple sect, also known as the West Hope Temple sect or the E sect. It has a total of 10,500 temples and more than 20 million believers. Takahashi Shoda just now is a soldier monk of the Imperial Shadow Hall of the E sect. The second is the True Sex Otani sect, also known as the East Hope Temple sect. It has more than 8,900 temples and more than 10 million believers. Although the other 8 sects are not as powerful as these 2 sects, they can't be underestimated. They are the True Sex Takata sect, the True Sex Fuguang Temple sect, the True Sex Xingjing sect, the True Sex Mubian sect, the True Sex Qinla sect, the True Sex Qingzhao Temple sect, the True Sex Three Disciples sects, and the True Sex Shanyuan sect." Zhang Lufang was tongue-tied. So many sects. So many temples. Why are there so many believers? Although the Jingyi school was known as the #1 cultivation sect in China, it was nothing compared to the Pure Land sect. Zhang Kongyun took a breath and continued, "All the people in Japan are religious. You can't compare them." Zhang Lufang asked in confusion, "But shouldn't the Shintoism be the most powerful sect in Japan? Why does the Pure Land sect account for so many people?" Zhang Kongyun's face was a little pale. He smiled and said, "Hey, this is the tradition of the Pure Land sect. No matter what they do, they are the vanguard. The elites of more than a dozen sects have all come out. Hundreds of years ago, during the Warring States period of Japan, the monk soldiers of the Pure Land sect beat the famous people of all countries until they cried for their parents. Decades ago, the Japanese military government invaded China, and the monk soldiers of more than a dozen sects of the Pure Land sect rushed to China to burn, kill, and loot. Decades later, they once again became the vanguard. Alas, it's a pity that I was shaken at that time and didn't give these guys a show of strength." Zhang Lufang comforted him and said, "Master, it's okay. Li Yundong has already avenged you." Zhang Kongyun looked at Li Yundong with a complicated expression and sighed softly. "I'm old." Zhang Lufang giggled and said, "Master, you are old but vigorous." Zhang Kongyun shook his head with a wry smile. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly heard a cry of surprise coming from afar. "What happened here? What the hell is going on?" Hearing this, everyone turned their heads and saw Lu Chunping running along the mountain road from afar. Before she arrived, her voice had already come from afar. Chapter 704. Everyone present saw Lu Chunping return with the officials and translators behind him. They immediately looked at each other in dismay and were greatly shocked. 9078, 8C3A4S6H507N8G67E9N8X0U2E30. 9C709M8. Before Lu Chunping could arrive, Zhou Ping quickly rushed to Zhang Ling. Zhang Ling asked with a sullen face, "What's wrong with you? Why did they come back? Why didn't you take them to other places to wander around?" Zhou Ping said with a sad face, "Master, it's not that I don't want to. It's just that you made too much noise here." Lu Chunping insisted on coming back, and I couldn't stop him. Zhang Ling's heart sank. She knew that today's matter would not end well, so she immediately stepped forward and was about to speak. Unexpectedly, when Lu Chunping saw the scene, he was so shocked that he almost fell to the ground, his eyes almost popping out of their sockets. At this time, the scene was a mess. The originally flat bluestone ground was full of potholes, as if it had just been hit by a fierce bombardment. The most terrible thing was that the ground was covered in blood. The Taoist hall seemed to have become a slaughterhouse. Lu Chunping stared blankly for a while. When he saw Zhang Ling walking toward him, he suddenly flew into a rage. He jumped 3 feet high and roared hysterically, "You be asterisk stards, do you take my words as nothing? Didn't I say that we should coexist peacefully and communicate in a friendly manner? Are you guys fighting a world war?" Zhang Ling saw him spitting saliva everywhere and scolding indiscriminately. She was a little angry, but she suppressed her anger and said, "Donor Lu, this matter is not caused by us." But, before she could finish speaking, Lu Chunping pointed at Zhang Ling and scolded her, "Don't you know how to control them? Don't you know how to restrain yourself? If they pick on you, will you help them? Didn't I tell you to be patient before? You're treating my words like wind passing by your ears." Zhang Ling's status in the Zhengyi school was extremely high, and she was treated politely wherever she went. She had never encountered such a thing before. She suddenly flew into a rage, and her eyebrows rose higher and higher. Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, felt that something was wrong. She rushed over to Li Yunyang and asked in a low voice, "Master, should we do something?" Li Yundong glanced at her and said, "In front of the enemy, let's unite against the enemy. It's not good for us to step in, so it's best if you step in. Go and help. After all, you're all cultivators of China." After getting Li Yundong's opinion, Zhou Qin felt reassured. She took a step forward and sneered, "How powerful! How powerful!" Lu Chunping was so angry that she immediately turned her head and said angrily, Who's farting?" Zhou Qin frowned and shouted rudely, You're talking nonsense." Lu Chunping was so angry that he was screaming. Just as he was about to curse, he saw Zhou Qin at a glance. He was stunned and couldn't help being shocked by Zhou Qin's beauty and temperament. For a moment, he couldn't say anything. After a while, he came to his senses and shouted angrily, "Who are you? How dare you talk to me like that? Which sect are you from?" From Lu Chunping's point of view, as long as they were from a cultivation sect, he could interfere. After all, no matter how powerful these cultivators were, they couldn't kill officials and rebel, right? However, he had never expected that the stunning beauty in front of him was the one he couldn't control. Zhou Qin smiled coldly, like a winter plum in the snow, and said proudly, "I am Super Li's eldest disciple, Zhou Qin. Do you know me now?" Lu Chunping didn't react for a moment and scolded, "Super Li? Bah! I've never heard of you. Zhou Qin. I'm even." Before he could finish his words, he suddenly thought of something. "Wait, Zhou Qin. Could it be Zhou Kachang's daughter? No. No way. It can't be so coincidental, can it?" Lu Chunping took a closer look at Zhou Qin. Sure enough, the more he looked at her, the more she looked like her. His mouth was wide open, and he couldn't say anything else for a while. But what he had said was like spilled water. He had just scolded someone before, and now he suddenly turned around. He really couldn't stop himself. Lu Chuanping's old face turned red, and he couldn't say anything for a while. But at this time, Saionji Tsunekatsu said, "Lu Jun, we came here with the intention of equal communication and peaceful learning, but we didn't expect that you Chinese cultivators had such a deep prejudice against us, which led to such a tragedy. I think it's necessary for you to give us an explanation for this matter, Lu Jun, otherwise, we will deeply regret it." These diplomatic words were like needles hidden in silk floss, causing Lu Chuanping's back to be covered with a layer of cold sweat. However, at this time, the people of Pure Land True Sect who were about to leave also surrounded them. A red-robed monk glared at Lu Chunping and shouted loudly. Lu Chunping naturally couldn't understand Japanese, so he had to turn his head to look at the translator. The female translator closest to him had a very ugly expression on her face. She said timidly, "He said. They killed an eminent monk. It was me. A man named Li Yundong, one of our Chinese people, just killed him. He wants us to hand over the murderer, otherwise. What? Someone died? Oh my God." When Lu Chunping heard this, he almost fainted. But when he heard the last sentence, the translator didn't finish. He held back his anger and asked, "Otherwise what?" The female translator said hesitantly, "Otherwise, they will find me and settle accounts with us." Lu Chunping was so angry that he almost wanted to go crazy. Settle accounts? You want to settle accounts with me? Who do I want to settle accounts with? Damn it, someone was killed. Lu Chuanping's face suddenly became extremely ugly. He couldn't care less about Zhou Qin's identity. He turned his head and roared at Li Yundong, "Are you crazy? How dare you kill a Japanese friend?" Li Yundong sneered and said, "A Japanese friend? Do you call the Japanese who killed 2 Chinese cultivators a Japanese friend?" Lu Chuanping's face suddenly turned red. He turned his head again and looked at Zhang Ling, panting heavily. What the hell is going on? Zhang Ling didn't want to talk to Lu Chunping. She was afraid that she would scold him the moment she opened her mouth. Zhang Ling gave Zhang Lufang a look, and Zhang Lufang immediately understood. She quickly told Zhang Ling what had happened. Zhang Lufang was beautiful and had a pleasant voice. She told the whole story clearly in a few words. When Lu Chunping heard this, he suddenly felt a headache coming on and wished that he had never come back. But if he hadn't come back, he was afraid that he would not have been able to escape a fault of dereliction of duty. After thinking about it, Lu Chunping almost gritted his teeth with hatred. All his anger was poured out on everyone present. The situation in front of him was really like a wolf in the front and a tiger behind. No matter which side Lu Chunping sided with, it would be wrong. If he sided with the Chinese, at that time, the Japanese would make a noise and complain to the higher-ups. Maybe he would even lose his position as an official in the yamen. But if he sided with the Japanese, Zhou Qin was not to be trifled with. The power of the Zhou family was a small matter, but at this critical moment, he would definitely be scolded as a traitor in the end. Who could bear this? When Lu Chuanping's head was full of sweat, his heart suddenly skipped a beat. He jumped up and shouted, "Stop arguing. If something happened, just disperse. We'll wait for the police to deal with this matter. Right, we don't have any blood feud. As the saying goes, it's better to get rid of enmity than to keep it alive. Don't be impatient. When the police come later, they will definitely give you justice." In Lu Chuanping's opinion, his Taiji fist was not bad. He had pushed all the blame onto the public security system. Anyway, he couldn't take care of this mess. Whoever could take care of it would. But when everyone heard this, there was an uproar. There was no blood feud. After these few fights, even if there was no hatred, he was afraid that there would be hatred. The Japanese were waiting for revenge, and the Chinese were not willing to disperse like this. Lu Chuanping's words had offended both sides at the same time. The Japanese were the first to not buy it. When the cultivators of the Pure Land sect heard this, they were all furious and immediately left. Even Saionji Tsunekatsu and the others could not stop them. The cultivators of all sects in China also began to make noise, pointing at Lu Chunping and shouting abuse. Lu Chunping was sweating profusely in the field, and the officials next to him also had ashen faces. Several of them even took out their mobile phones and looked at Lu Chunping eagerly. As long as he said a word, they would call the police. At this moment, a middle-aged man wearing a high black hat and a wide-sleeved white robe whispered a few words to Saionji Tsunekatsu and walked slowly to the field. The Japanese seemed to be unaware of Lu Chuanping's existence. He cupped his hands on the field, cleared his throat and spoke in Japanese. Although everyone hated this group of Japanese devils at this time, they saw that this middle-aged man had a dignified appearance and an excellent bearing. His every movement revealed an indescribable elegance and grandeur. Especially when he opened his mouth to speak, his voice seemed to be singing a poem. Although they didn't know what he was saying, the sonorous and powerful tone of his voice, and the cadence was also quite beautiful. At this time, Saionji Tsunekatsu translated for the middle-aged man in a loud voice, "Inyang Master Abe of the Japanese Inyang sect is reasonable." At this time, the field suddenly quieted down. For a moment, the cultivators of all sects in China widened their eyes and looked at Abe carefully. Chinese cultivators didn't know much about the Shinto of the Earth Imperial sect in Japan, but the Inyang master of the Abe family was well known to everyone. Abe Inyang was not a famous figure in Japan, but his ancestors, the great Inyang master Abe Saimai and Abe Yasukin, who had personally sealed the mystical silver fox, were definitely well known to everyone, including women and children. Abe no Saimai and Abe no Yasuhisa. Even in the eyes of the top experts in the Chinese cultivation world, these two were names that reverberated like thunder. That was because this family once represented the pinnacle of the Japanese cultivation world. Li Yunyang looked at Abe Inyang seriously. He nodded slightly and said, "Well, how do you want to compete?" But before Saionji Tsunekatsu could translate, Lu Chunping suddenly said loudly, "Do you all think I don't exist? Do you all think my words are bullshit? What did I just say?" After Abe Inyang listened to Saionji Tsunekatsu's translation, he glanced at Lu Chunping faintly, said a few words in Japanese, and then took out a 5-pointed star talisman from his sleeve and held it between his 2 fingertips. Saionji Tsunekatsu translated for him, genuinely, "Lord Abe said that as long as you can break his magic, you will win." Li Yunyang was stunned and secretly vigilant. Jinqi surged all over his body. Although he didn't know what magic Abe Inyang was going to use, he planned to deal with all changes by remaining unchanged. He could be strong, but the bright moon shines on the river. Everyone saw that the 5-pointed star talisman gradually became brighter and brighter. This light was very dazzling even in the daytime. After Abe Inyang quickly recited a spell, the 5-pointed star talisman in his hands suddenly ignited and turned into a blue light and disappeared. The people on the sidelines suddenly looked nervously at every corner of the field, as if a monster could appear anywhere. But just when everyone was suspicious, Lu Chunping suddenly danced and laughed strangely. He even sang a Japanese song, and his movements were the dance movements of a Japanese geisha. The cultivators of all sects in China were dumbfounded for a moment. They were amused and horrified at the same time. Those who reacted quickly immediately realized what was going on and stared at Abe with their eyes wide open. No way, this guy actually cast an illusion on Lu Chunping? Li Yunyang also quickly understood. It turned out that this guy was using Lu Chunping as a sex experiment, so that he could break his illusion. This is too messy, isn't it? The officials who followed Lu Chunping to the sidelines were also shocked and pale at this time. Some people dared to reach out and pull Lu Chunping, trying to wake him up. But as soon as they pulled, Lu Chunping's face suddenly became extremely ferocious and horrible. He stared at them and scolded them in very fluent Japanese. This scared them so much that they looked at each other for a moment. Lu Chunping doesn't understand Japanese. How did he suddenly become like this? They watched Lu Chunping scream and dance as if he was possessed by a ghost, as if he had gone mad. The young female translator who had translated for Lu Chunping before was so scared that her teeth were chattering. She whispered, "Will we become like this later?" These words caused the few of them to fall silent at the same time. Immediately after, someone let out a yell and dashed down the mountain. With the first one, there was immediately a second one. No matter how wrong they felt, at this time, they could only shout with tears streaming down their faces, "Secretary General Lu, it's not that our army is incompetent, but that these bastards are too cunning. Please hold on. We, all our compatriots in Guishi County of Ingtan City support you in spirit." For a moment, the group of officials and a few translators covered their heads and ran down the mountain. Group 18 is full. Don't add any more. Group 19 will open in 2 days. Chapter 705. Li Yundong looked at Lu Chunping, who was dancing in front of him, and couldn't help frowning. Soon after the battle in Mount Koya, the Japanese cultivators had already discovered his identity and background as the reincarnation of Wisdom King. The battle just now had confirmed this point, making these Japanese fully understand, "Don't use Buddhist magic and powerful magical weapons to attack me, otherwise you will be asking for trouble." It was precisely because they realized this in an instant that Pure Land True sect immediately chose to retreat collectively, so as to use their indignation to save the face of the sect. Although Takahashi Shoda was a famous expert in the cultivation world of Japan, he was not the strongest in front of such a huge cultivation sect as Pure Land True sect. The suzerain of Pure Land True sect had not made a move yet, nor had their great monk Xing appeared. As long as the strongest person did not appear, they would not fall too badly. They would not be completely defeated, and they would have an explanation when they went back. Although dozens of people from more than a dozen sects of the Pure Land True sect had evacuated collectively, there were still many Japanese masters on the field. Not to mention anything else, the great Onmyoji of the Abe family was an extremely difficult opponent to deal with. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, who were on the sidelines, looked around curiously. They looked at Li Yundong and Abe, who were motionless, and then at Lu Chunping, who seemed to be possessed by a ghost. Deng Jiao, who was shy, couldn't help asking curiously, "Shiji Lu Fang, why isn't Li Yundong moving?" After the officials left, the cultivators of all sects on the field also calmed down. Their attention was once again attracted to the scene. Zhang Lufang looked at Lu Chunping nervously and said in a low voice, "Li Yundong is speculating what kind of illusion the other party is using and how to break it." Deng Yu smiled maliciously. "Won't it be solved if we kill this guy?" Zhang Lufang turned her head and glared at her. "How can we cultivators kill unarmed ordinary people?" Deng Yu was scolded by her. She pouted and said, "Who told this guy to be so annoying?" Zhang Lufang said in a low voice, "No matter how annoying you are, you can't attack ordinary people. You must remember this. This is the iron law of our cultivators. Otherwise, you will suffer divine punishment." Deng Yu made an "oh" sound and said resentfully, then, "Senior Sister Lu Fang, how do we break this illusion? Isn't Li Yundong very powerful? Why hasn't there been any movement?" Zhang Lufang knew that they had only been cultivating for a short time and didn't know much about fighting, so she patiently explained, "There are many kinds of illusions. There are many kinds of illusions in the cultivation world of Hua alone. Those who are most proficient in illusions are the fox spirits of the Fox Zen school, followed by the cultivators of Lu Guandao. In Japan, the Onmyoji were probably the most proficient in genjutsu. Yin-yang masters have many types of illusions, such as illusion technique, illusion technique, illusion technique, illusion spirit technique, illusion technique, and so on. There are more than 10 types of illusions, and every type of illusion has a different method of breaking it. If you fail to break it, then the person using the illusion will probably have to stay like this forever. Deng Yu was taken aback. Then, what about this Lu something guy? Zhang Lufang said helplessly, then he can only accept his fate. However, it's a small matter that he has become a lunatic, but if this matter is spread out and the people above know about it, I'm afraid we will also be out of luck. This Japanese is up to no good. Deng Yu looked at Li Yundong eagerly, her hands clenched into fists, like a young girl praying. God bless Li Yundong, let him pass this test smoothly. Li Yundong really wanted to pass the test smoothly now, but the illusion in front of him was really difficult for him to deal with. There are many types of onmyoji in Japan, such as the Abe family, and the Abe family's mortal enemy, the Kemo family, and other sections. They all belong to the Japanese Shintoism, and the Yin-Yang sect originated from the Warring States period of China. During the Warring States period, Zhou Yan and Zhou Shuang of the Qi kingdom proposed the Yin-Yang theory, which regarded yin and yang as two forces inside the body of all things. They believed that yin and yang were the source of all things in the world. This concept coincided with the idea of the founder of Taoism, Lao Tzu: Tao begets one, one begets two, two begets three, three begets all things. Therefore, onmyoji had a strong Taoist imprint from the beginning. Taoism explained all things through the 5 elements of yin and yang, and onmyoji happened to be the same. Therefore, the origin of all the magic of onmyoji was actually similar to the magic of Taoism. The magic of Taoism was nothing more than the 5 elements, yin and yang, and the power of thunder. To generate a magic, it was natural to use the yin and yang qi and the 5 elements of qi in the body to drive the zhenqi, so as to use the 5 elements of heaven and earth to release the magic. In the same way, it was the same to crack the illusion. The source of the magic power of the illusion in front of him must be created through yin and yang and 5 elements. If he wanted to crack the illusion, he must understand the source of the opponent's magic power and the composition of the magic. Otherwise, if he cracked it rashly and failed, the consequences would be unimaginable. Although Li Yundong didn't like Lu Chunping, who was biased, he was even more unwilling to lose the battle in front of him. Li Yundong carefully looked at Lu Chunping in front of him. He was keenly aware that the facial features on Lu Chunping's face were significantly different from before. Before, Lu Chunping's nose was black and dry, the corners of his eyes were blue, and his lips were bright red like fire. At this time, the tip of his nose was shiny, and there was a faint brownish-blue qi coming out of his nose. There were even red spots in his eyes. Li Yundong knew that the Yellow Emperor's canon of internal medicine said, the nose is the organ of the lungs, the eyes are the organ of the liver, the mouth and lips are the organ of the spleen, the tongue is the organ of the heart, and the ears are the organ of the kidney. Before, Lu Chunping could see that there was a big problem with his 5 internal organs from the look, listen, ask, and feel. The nose was black and dry, which was the result of excessive indulgence in sexual intercourse. Such a person's kidneys must be weak and premature ejaculation. The people with blue eyes mostly had liver problems, and the lips were bright red like fire, which meant that this person had heat poison in his body, and the yin deficiency and fire were strong. But at this time, Lu Chunping was abnormal. His face was red, the tip of his nose was black and dry, the corners of his eyes were blue, and his lips were bright red. This meant that the qi of the liver and kidney in Lu Chunping's body must be strong at this time. At this time, there was a brownish-blue qi coming out of his nose, and there were red spots in his eyes. This meant that there was something wrong with Lu Chunping's spleen, and his blood flow was not smooth. Li Yundong observed for a while. He had basically determined where the other party's illusion magic came from. From the observation of the 5 senses, he could judge the condition of the 5 internal organs, and from the condition of the 5 internal organs, he could infer the source of the mystery of the 5 elements magic. The heart, liver, spleen, lung, and kidney corresponded to the 5 elements of fire, wood, earth, metal, and water. At this time, Lu Chunping's liver and kidney were strong, which meant that the illusion Lu Chunping was suffering from must have been produced by the qi of wood and water. It was precisely because this magic was applied to Lu Chuanping's body that his liver and kidneys suddenly became strong for a while. As long as he took the right medicine, the other party's illusion would immediately be resolved. But at this time, Li Yundong was also keenly aware. He knew that since the other party was an outstanding yin-yang master, especially as the patriarch of the Abe family, he would definitely not use such a simple illusion to fight with him. Thinking of this, Li Yundong couldn't help but think of the time when he had just started to cultivate. Zi Yuan had taken out her ninth heaven Zi Yuan silk to show him and taught him about the dark fighting skills of a magic weapon fighting for the first time. Zi Yuan's ninth heaven Zi Yuan silk had 3 different Jinshi auras of yin, yang, and wood. At that time, Zi Yuan had relied on yin qi to entangle with him in the open, luring the enemy step by step. When he had been led to the hinterland, suddenly, the yang qi and wood qi of her magic weapon had rushed out at the same time, and he had been defeated. This matter had left a deep impression on Li Yunyang. It made him realize that fighting with methods is like using troops, and that fighting with magic was also, the false is the real, and the real is the false. Could the result on Lu Chuanping's face be true? Could it be a trap of the other party? The other party was a famous great yin-yang master. She wouldn't use such a simple illusion, would she? At this time, Li Yundong squinted at Lu Chunping, and his eyes fell on Lu Chuanping's tongue. At this time, Lu Chunping was not only dancing, but also baring her teeth and claws. Li Yundong's sharp eyes saw at a glance that the tip of Lu Chuanping's tongue was extremely thick, like a thick layer of cold white calluses. Li Yundong's heart suddenly moved. Of the 5 senses, the tongue corresponded to the heart of the 5 internal organs, and the heart corresponded to the 5 elements of fire. This meant that there must be something wrong with Lu Chuanping's heart at this time, and there must be a cold yin qi lingering around it. At this time, Li Yundong's heart was calm. He concluded that the other party's magic must be a combination of yin qi, wood qi, and water qi. As long as he used yang qi, metal qi, and fire qi to attack Lu Chuanyuan's lungs and heart at the same time, he would definitely be able to break this illusion immediately. As soon as this thought flashed through Li Yundong's mind, he immediately pinched his fingers and bent them slightly. He quickly flicked Lu Chuanping's body 3 times in the air, one on the Shenfeng acupoint near his lungs, the other on the Tianqi acupoint near his heart, and the other on the Shenting acupoint on his forehead. The reason why the illusion could work on people was that the caster disturbed the normal qi of the 5 elements of the human body, thus causing the other party's 5 internal organs to be in disorder and qi and blood to be in disorder. This further caused the qi of the upper dantian in the brain to be in a mess, and he couldn't think like a normal person. Li Yundong's 3rd flick had stabilized the chaotic qi in Lu Chuanping's brain. Lu Chunping, who had been dancing, suddenly seemed to have been immobilized. He stood there in a daze, motionless. In the eyes of the cultivators on the sidelines, Li Yundong was stunned for a long time. After he finally moved, he raised his hand and flicked his fingers 3 times, and Lu Chunping immediately quieted down. Some people with low cultivation quotients couldn't see the slightest mystery, while some cultivators with high cultivation quotients and high knowledge were full of praise. Su Yangzi nodded secretly on the side of the field and said, if Li Yundong won purely by strength, then it wouldn't be considered a skill. But in the blink of an eye, he was able to see through the mystery of his opponent's illusion and immediately counterattack. This is really outstanding and commendable. Mao Yucheng also secretly admired Li Yundong's reaction, but she still said unforgiving, how can it be so easy? If I were Abe, would I put all the flaws in front of you for you to see clearly? As soon as she finished speaking, Lu Chunping suddenly roared. His whole body trembled violently, beads of sweat rolling down his forehead, and 2 sharp horn-like hard objects slowly protruded from his forehead. His face turned blue and black, and his facial features became extremely ferocious, as if he was about to become a yiksha demon. The cultivators on the sidelines were all shocked. Li Yundong was also shocked, and his face was awe-inspiring. He thought to himself, what's going on? Did I fail to crack the illusion? No way. That's impossible. While Li Yundong was in shock, Abe, who was opposite him, suddenly smiled and said a few words in a loud voice. Saionji Tsunekatsu, who was on the sidelines, translated with some schadenfreude, generally, if you think that our Abe family only has a few moves, then you are very wrong. Now, let me show you what a real great yin-yang master is. Chapter 706. Abe Yuji chose to fight with Li Yundong in illusions. He had witnessed Li Yundong defeat his opponents with terrifying power twice, so he knew that although his cultivation was not low, if he fought with Li Yundong head-on, it was very likely that he would be defeated. 9078, 8C3A4S6H507N8G67E9N8X0U2E30. 9C709M8. Moreover, as a yin-yang master, he was naturally good at summoning ghosts, but the other party was the reincarnation of Akalanatha. Wherever he stood, with his hands pinching the Akalanatha seal, the power emitted from his body was enough to deter any demons and ghosts. Not to mention controlling these ghosts to summon up the courage to attack Li Yundong. Even if he could barely control these ghosts to attack Li Yundong, he was afraid that they would be restrained by the power of Akalanatha. Knowing that it was impossible to do it, it was obviously not wise. Abe Yuji cleverly released two illusions on Lu Chunping. One was the Phantom Soul Technique, to control the other party's mind, and the other was the Phantom Soul Technique, to control the other party's body. Although illusions occupied the word phantom, as the name implied, these were all illusory illusions, but when the illusions were cultivated to the peak, they could also be made real. The Phantom Soul Technique and the Phantom Soul Technique used by Abe Yuji before could be said to be two opposite spells of the Yin and Yang 5 elements. If Li Yundong made a move against the Phantom Soul Technique, the power of Jinqi would definitely enhance the power of the Phantom Soul Technique. Similarly, if Li Yundong made a move against the Phantom Soul Technique, it would enhance the power of the Phantom Soul Technique. It could be said that the two illusions restrained and supported each other, complemented each other, and were a perfect combination of spells that could hardly be broken. In Abe Yuji's view, he wanted to fight with Li Yundong, not with strength, wisdom, not with courage. At present, he was obviously in an invincible position. Li Yundong didn't know it. Although he broke the Phantom Soul Technique, his strength was like a new force, and immediately stimulated the Phantom Soul Technique. Originally, the Phantom Soul Technique could only make the person who was cast mistakenly think that he had become something, but how powerful was Li Yundong's qi? As soon as his majestic qi entered Lu Chuanyuan's body, the illusion spell in his body suddenly became real, like rain after a long drought. His bones and body began to change shape. Li Yundong cracked one magic, but immediately activated another. The faces of the cultivators present turned pale for a moment. They knew that the illusion had become real, which meant that the magic was irreversible. Li Yundong had lost the battle, which meant that there were almost no powerful masters in the Chinese cultivation world who could stop these Japanese. This battle would end in a crushing defeat for the Chinese cultivation world. Worst of all, a living official had been turned into a monster. How was he going to explain this to the higher-ups? For a moment, the faces of Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin were as pale as paper. Zhou Qin stammered, This is impossible. Master will never lose. Su Chan grabbed Zi Yuan's arm anxiously and kept shaking it. Sister Zi Yuan, what should we do? Was there any other way? Hurry up and think of a way. Zi Yuan bit her lips so hard that it almost bled. Her brows had never been so furrowed before, and her expression had never been as anxious as it was today. She couldn't help but send a voice transmission to Li Yundong. Li Yundong, winning or losing is a small matter. You can't let this guy become a monster. Otherwise, if this matter gets out, it will be a big disaster. Although Li Yundong was shocked and provoked by his opponent's words, he had fought countless battles since he had taken Renyuan Jindan, and his mind had long been extremely firm. The greater the pressure, the calmer he was. The more critical the situation was, the more he could turn the tide. At this time, when he heard Zi Yuan's words, his heart suddenly moved. He opened his eyes, raised his hand, and pulled out a few strands of hair from his head. With a shake of his wrist, like throwing gold needles, he pricked the hair in his hand into the arteries of Lu Chuanping's neck, chest, elbows, and thighs. Lu Chuanping's body shook. These strands of hair were firmly stuck to his body like steel wires, and there was no sign of softening at all. The people on the sidelines saw this and were secretly shocked. Almost everyone on the field could throw their hair like needles, but Li Yundong, after throwing it out and pricking the opponent's body, could still be as hard as a steel needle, not softening at all. That was really a shocking ability. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, the two rookies, were tongue-tied and asked, "Is Li Yundong's hair made of steel wires?" However, Zhang Lufang explained with a face full of awe, "No, this is caused by Li Yundong's extremely strong and fierce jinqi in it. Such a strong jinqi attached to a strand of hair, if thrown out, can even pierce through a stone, but it didn't pierce through Lu Chunping. This is incredible." Li Wudi's grasp of strength, hardness, and gentleness had reached an exquisite level of perfection. Amazing, it's really amazing. Previously, Zi Yuan and Inspector Ono had fought in the way of spinning tops. Their control of strength had already been an eye-opener for everyone, but at this time, Li Yundong had shown his skill, which was even more exquisite than Zi Yuan's. But after Zhang Lufang sighed, she couldn't help but show a trace of regret and helplessness. Unfortunately, no matter how powerful he is, he can't reverse the situation. This game, we lost. At this time, not only Zhang Lufang, but everyone on the field thought that Li Yundong had lost the battle. The combination of magic that the opponent had used was really sinister and hidden to the extreme. Even if they were not convinced, they thought in their hearts, even if I were to go up, I'm afraid I would end up like Li Yundong. This magic can't be broken, unless Lu Chunping is killed. Otherwise, it can't be broken at all. But can Lu Chunping be killed? It's fine if he is a secular mortal, but he is also a high-ranking official in the system. As the saying goes, killing an official is equivalent to rebelling. If Li Yundong wanted to win, did he have to kill an official and rebel? However, Li Yundong immediately did something that left them dumbfounded. After Li Yundong threw out a few strands of hair and nailed a few holes in Lu Chuanping's veins, he immediately shouted and clapped his hands toward him. A majestic force slapped toward Lu Chunping like a mountain and overturning the sea. With a boom, Lu Chuanping's body suddenly shook violently, and a few columns of blood shot out from the places where his hair had been tied up like high-pressure water guns. Then, Li Yundong shouted at him angrily. This loud shout shook the sky, and everyone on the field was so shocked that their hearts beat violently and their qi and blood fluctuated. As cultivators, they were already like this on the sidelines, let alone Lu Chunping, who was the first to bear the brunt. Everyone saw that Lu Chuanping's body trembled as if he had been electrocuted, and then blood slowly flowed out of his 7 orifices. He had been killed by Li Yundong on the spot, and his body, which had become like a demon and a ghost, also returned to its original state little by little. For a moment, everyone was stunned. Even Abe Yuji looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look in his eyes. There was shock, admiration, and a faint trace of regret and sympathy. Li Yundong killed a secular mortal. Although he didn't use magic, he used the purest power of jinqi, which was no different from using magic and magic treasures. The only criterion for judging the reason for the heavenly tribulation was whether it was directly killed by the power of jinqi. Once it was determined that it was killed by the power of jinqi, heaven would lock on this power, and then find the user of this power, and send the heavenly tribulation to punish him. All magic and magic treasures were directly activated by the power of jinqi. Therefore, killing with magic and magic treasures would attract the heavenly tribulation, but in fact, killing with the power of jinqi would also attract the heavenly tribulation. Moreover, if it was an ordinary secular person, it would be fine, but this person was still an official. In Abe Yuji's view, Li Yundong would definitely have a terrible disaster in the future, and it was even very likely that there would be no such person in the Chinese cultivation world from now on. Abe Yuji stared at Li Yundong for a long time, and then he slowly sighed and said, "I lost." As he said this, he slowly walked to the cultivators of various sects in Japan. He had a high reputation in the Japanese cultivation world. As soon as he returned to his side, someone came forward and comforted him. "Lord Abe, victory and defeat are common in the military. Don't worry about it." Sayonji Tsunekatsu also smiled slightly and said, "Exactly. We also want to congratulate Lord Abe for removing this great enemy for our Japanese cultivation world." Abe sighed and said, "What's there to be happy about when you're prepared and when you're unprepared? It's an unfair victory. I'd rather everyone fight and learn from each other peacefully. There's no need to fight to the death." Ise Chuyun, who had been silently watching the field, suddenly said, "In that case, Uncle Abe, why were you so insidious just now?" Abe Yuji said seriously, "Since I'm standing on the battlefield, how can I show mercy? Naturally, I have to do everything possible to knock down the strong enemy in front of me." Ise Shingguang laughed and clapped his hands. "Well said, well said. This is the great Yin-Yang master of our Japanese cultivation world." Hearing this, Ise Chuyun seemed to be deep in thought. He looked at Li Yundong with flickering eyes and said in a low voice, "Unfortunately, I can't fight with him." Although the Japanese cultivation world had lost this battle, everyone was happy because they knew that Li Yundong would be in big trouble in the future. The people of China would get rid of this terrible opponent for them. Although the Chinese cultivation world had won, many people looked as if they had lost their parents. Su Chan, Zhou Qin, and Zi Yuan's faces changed dramatically. Zhou Qin was extremely strong-willed, but at this time, she couldn't help but be dazzled. She was so shocked that her body was almost on the verge of collapse. Su Chan's body was almost soft. If it weren't for her master Ao Wushuang supporting her, she would have fallen to the ground in fear. Zi Yuan was the only one who could barely hold on. Her beautiful red lips had been bitten by herself, but she didn't know it. She was just thinking quickly about how to help Li Yundong deal with this disaster. But just as they were panicking, Li Yundong showed a crafty smile at the corner of his mouth. He walked slowly to Lu Chunping, reached out his hand, and pressed it gently on his chest. Then, his fingers quickly swept across his body, and a few strands of hair that had been stuck on his body before were taken off. Seeing his actions, everyone sighed inwardly. However, someone with sharp eyes suddenly saw that Lu Chunping actually let out a long sigh, and his chest began to rise and fall again. At this moment, everyone's eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. Sayonji Tsunekatsu was so scared that he took a step back. As if he had seen a ghost, he stammered, This is impossible. He's not dead?" Abe couldn't believe his eyes. He stared at Lu Chunping with his eyes wide open. His mouth was wide open, and he couldn't react for a moment. Ise Shingguang was stunned for a moment, and then there was a flash of light in his eyes. He clapped his hands and couldn't help shouting, "Wonderful, it's really wonderful. Putting oneself on the brink of death and coming back to life, it's too wonderful for words." You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.